Welcome back to Terrified Tales, where the rain falls slow and the fear creeps in quicker. Like and subscribe before we begin, and tell us where and when you're listening. Midnight, alone, that's when they find you. The town of Ashwick seemed to breathe in the fog, an ancient, slumbering place that had seen centuries come and go without care. Elise Farrow stood in the shadow of the crumbling church, her hands trembling despite the stillness of the air. The church was long abandoned, its stone walls smothered in creeping ivy and the ghosts of old prayers. For years, it had been a silent witness to the town's slow decay, its hollow windows like hollow eyes staring out into the relentless fog that always seemed to creep in from the nearby forest. Today, though, it felt different. The fog was thicker, as if it had a presence of its own, as though it was alive and watching her. The coin appeared from nowhere. She hadn't noticed it at first. The stone underfoot was cracked, weathered by time, and she had been staring down at the ground, lost in her thoughts. It was when she knelt to examine a small, worn symbol etched into the stone that her fingers brushed against the rusted metal. Cold, old, and strangely comforting in its chill, it sat in the cracks, half buried as though it had been waiting for someone to find it. Her breath caught in her throat as she picked it up. The coin felt heavier than it should, the weight unsettling in her palm. It was small, with jagged edges, and the metal was stained in places, like the rust had once been something else, something brighter. The markings etched into its surface were unlike anything she had seen before, swirling symbols that seemed to shift when she looked at them too long, as if they weren't quite meant to be read by modern eyes. She stared at it, her heart racing, a sense of foreboding rising from deep within her. Elise's thoughts flickered back to her childhood, to the night Marla had disappeared. Marla, her younger sister, had always been obsessed with forgotten things, strange things that no one else cared about. It was Marla who had first drawn Elise into the mystery of Ashwick's cursed history, to the old ruins, to the ancient books in the town's dusty library. Elise had always been skeptical, but Marla believed in the old things, those dark, half-forgotten whispers of an ancient language that had been buried for centuries. Elise ran her thumb along the edge of the coin, feeling the roughness of it, the strange, cold weight. The image of Marla flickered in her mind, her sister's face, laughing in the glow of the fireplace, her voice soft and far away, calling her name. But the sound wasn't right. It was broken, like the memory had been cracked in two. She closed her eyes, the image blurring, and the world around her seemed to shift. A distant voice, soft, barely audible, but there, whispered in the fog. Elise. The whisper curled around her name, wrapping it in a coldness that made her spine stiffen. She looked around, her pulse quickening. The town was empty. The air was thick with the scent of wet stone and earth. But there was something else, something in the space between the fog and the ruin. The rustling of the wind through the leaves, the distant creak of wood, the faintest hint of a whisper. That was all she could hear now. And the coin. The weight of it, still heavy in her palm, was no longer just cold metal. It felt alive, as though it was calling to her, asking her to remember. She stood slowly, holding the coin up to the light. The symbols seemed to shift again, morphing as though they were almost moving, as if they had a life of their own. Her vision blurred for a moment and the air around her grew heavier, the fog thickening. Elise. The voice was clearer this time, no longer a whisper but a beckoning call. Her breath caught in her throat. She had to leave. She had to leave right now. This place, this coin, the whispers, everything was wrong. But before she could take another step, something shifted in the fog ahead. A figure appeared, flickering at the edge of her vision. For a moment, she thought it was just a trick of the light, the shadows playing games with her mind. But as the figure stepped forward, she recognized the face. Marla, her sister, the Girl who had disappeared all those years ago. Elise? Marla's voice echoed, distant but unmistakable. Elise froze. Her heart pounded as the fog began to swirl around her, thick and oppressive, the air thick with the scent of decay. Marla smiled at her from within the mist, but there was something off about the expression. It wasn't the smile Elise remembered, the warmth, the laughter. This smile was colder, sharper, like something was hiding behind it. Elise, you found it, Marla's voice echoed, hollow. The fog thickened, drowning out the rest of her words. The image of Marla faded, slipping away, into the mist as quickly as it had appeared. The voice continued to echo, fading into the distance, but Elise couldn't move. She could only stare down at the rusted coin in her hand. She felt its weight in her palm, the strange pull of its ancient power drawing her closer to something she couldn't name. Elise. Her sister's voice. She had never thought she would hear it again. But now that it had returned, it wasn't the comfort she had hoped for. It was an invitation into something dark. Something was waking up. Elise barely slept that night. The fog clung to Ashwick like a shroud, heavier than it had ever been before, as though the town itself was breathing in the mist and holding its secrets in a tight, suffocating grip. The whispers still lingered. In her mind, a ghostly murmur that wouldn't let her forget. They followed her, echoing from the edges of her thoughts like faint traces of a memory she couldn't place. They were there, beneath every sound, in the spaces between every word. Elise ran her fingers over the coin again, feeling the cool metal against her skin, the strange symbols pulsing in the dim light of her room. The more she studied it, the more she felt like it was changing her. The coldness seeped into her bones, and the weight in her hand seemed to grow heavier with each passing second. She couldn't remember the last time she had been this unsettled. The next morning, she decided to call Victor North. She hadn't spoken to him in weeks, but she knew he would have answers, or at least he might be able to help her make sense of the coin. Victor was an antiquities dealer, someone who dealt in lost history and forgotten relics. He was used to strange things, and Elise trusted him more than anyone else when it came to things that didn't quite belong in the world. The phone rang twice, then 3 times before a voice answered, muffled and distant. Elise? Victor's voice was hoarse, like he'd just woken up. What's going on? You sound off. I found something, Elise said, trying to keep her voice steady, but the tremor was unmistakable. A coin, in the ruins. Victor was quiet for a long moment, the line crackling as though he was listening to something else on the other end. Elise felt the silence stretch between them. What kind of coin? He finally asked. It's old, she began, her words spilling out in a rush. It has strange symbols on it. I can't make sense of them, but I know they mean something. Something important. Another pause. Elise could almost hear the gears turning in Victor's head. He was no stranger to the strange and the occult, but this was different. It was like something inside her was telling her she needed to keep digging, that the coin was somehow connected to Marla's disappearance. All right, Victor said finally, his voice a little firmer now. I'll come over, but Elise, you need to be careful. Ashwick has a way of pulling people in. It's not just the fog, it's the history. Something's not right about that place. I know, Elise replied quietly. I know. After they hung up, Elise found herself pacing the room. The fog outside had thickened overnight, and now it crept along the edges of the windows like fingers reaching into the house, pulling the world outside into a soft, suffocating blur. The coin sat on the desk, gleaming faintly in the pale light that filtered through the curtains. It seemed to be calling to her, its heavy presence growing more insistent with every passing second. Elise's fingers itched to pick it up again, but she hesitated. Something was pulling her in, something dark. And the longer she stayed in Ashwick, the more she realized how connected she was to it. Her sister's voice echoed in her mind once more, the faintest whisper that set her pulse racing. Elise. The words made her head swim. She couldn't escape the feeling that the town itself was watching her, that the fog, the ruins, the strange symbols, it was all tied together in some way, all connected to her past, to Marla. A knock on the door startled her out of her thoughts. Elise rushed to answer, finding Victor standing in the doorway, his face drawn with concern. "Elise," he started, his eyes immediately scanning the room. "You've been digging into something deeper than you think." She stepped aside to let him in. "You think I'm imagining things?" Victor shook his head, stepping into the room. "No, it's not that. I've seen this before. People who get obsessed with things they don't understand. They lose themselves." "I'm not losing myself," Elise snapped, then immediately softened. "I just need answers. You know as well as I do that there's something here. Something with the language. Something connected to Marla." Victor didn't respond right away. Instead, he walked over to the desk where the coin lay. He picked it up carefully, turning it in his hand, studying the symbols with a frown. "Elise," he said, after a long pause, "this is older than anything I've ever seen. The symbols, they aren't just ancient, they're..." He trailed off, unable to find the words. "What?" Elise pressed. "Eldritch," he finished softly, almost to himself. "This isn't just some lost language. These are the remnants of something ancient, something that was buried for a reason. People who studied this kind of thing, they didn't just vanish, Elise. They were erased." A chill crept over her, and the whispers seemed to grow louder, like they were pressing against her ears. Her fingers clenched around the edges of the coin, her pulse quickening. "What does that mean?" she asked, though she already had a sinking feeling she knew the answer. Victor set the coin down gently, his face pale. "It means that whatever's connected to this language, whatever your sister was chasing, it's not just a memory. It's a force. And it's still here." The air in the room grew colder, the fog outside pressing in on the windows like a suffocating wave. Elise felt a creeping dread, but it wasn't just from the words Victor spoke. It was the realization that she was caught in the same web, the same strange, endless loop that had ensnared her sister. "Elise," Victor continued, his voice quiet, but urgent. "Whatever this is, it's not just about the language. It's about the people who spoke it. They didn't just fade away. They were taken, consumed by something far worse than just knowledge." The words hung in the air, thick with the weight of truth. Elise felt herself tremble, her breath shallow as she stared at the coin again. It gleamed with a dark, cold light. The fog outside thickened, swirling with intent, and the whispers called her name once more, Elise. The following night was colder than usual, and the fog had swallowed Ashwick completely. It pressed in on the house, filling every crevice with its suffocating embrace, the world outside a soft, indistinct blur. Elise sat at her desk, the rusted coin before her, the symbols still impossible to decipher. The whispers had grown louder, mingling with the sound of her own thoughts. Every time she closed her eyes, she felt the pull of something ancient, something dark, whispering in her mind. But it wasn't just the coin. It was her memories. Elise reached for her glass of water, her hand shaking, but as she touched the rim, the image flashed before her eyes. Marla. She saw her sister, young and smiling, standing next to her in the woods just outside of Ashwick, the trees looming like silent watchers. Elise couldn't recall the exact moment it had happened, But she remembered the warmth of the sun, the laughter shared between the two of them, the sound of Marla's voice, her soft, familiar tones. It had all been so simple then. But as Elise blinked, the scene fractured, distorting into a series of broken images, jagged and out of place. The memory no longer felt warm. It felt hollow, like something had been stolen from it, something important. Marla's face blurred, her eyes becoming distant, colder. Elise's chest tightened, a sharp pang of loss and confusion hitting her, like a wave. She had been the last one to see her sister that night, before Marla vanished, before everything changed. Her hand gripped the edge of the desk, the sharp edge pressing into her palm as she tried to hold on to the thread of the memory. But it slipped away like sand through her fingers. The image of Marla's face flickered again, now almost unrecognizable, swallowed by a darkness that seemed to pulse with a life of its own. Then, the sound, the voice. Elise. The name came through, distant and broken. It didn't feel like her sister's voice anymore. The tone was warped, like an echo of something lost. Elise, the voice called again, but this time it sounded strained, desperate. The whisper carried a weight, a presence. Elise felt a coldness seep through her skin, like fingers trailing along her spine. Her breath quickened, her heart hammering in her chest as she tried to shake the image away, but it lingered, hanging over her like a cloud of dread. She stood up abruptly, pushing the chair back, her legs unsteady. The memory was slipping further out of her reach, replaced by something darker, something she couldn't put her finger on. There was a crackle in the air, like static electricity, and the lights flickered. Elise froze. Her pulse quickened. She could hear the faintest sound, scratching like nails on wood, coming from somewhere behind her. The noise was low, deliberate, but it wasn't the wind. It wasn't natural. The scratching grew louder, closer, and Elise spun around, her heart thumping in her chest. The room was empty, the shadows long and stretching across the walls, the air thick with the scent of damp wood and must. But something was different now. She felt it, a pressure in the room, as though the walls themselves were closing in on her. A shiver ran down her spine as she took a step back. Her eyes darted around the room, searching for the source of the sound, but there was nothing. Just the soft, persistent scratching. It was coming from the far corner of the room. Elise's breath caught in her throat, her instinct screaming at her to run, but her feet felt frozen to the floor. She stepped forward, the floor creaking beneath her, and as she approached the corner, her hand trembling, she reached for the light switch. The scratch, scratch, scratch grew louder, more frantic, almost urgent. The light flickered and then died. The room was plunged into darkness. Elise, the voice was clear now. It wasn't just in her head. It was real, echoing through the darkness, coming from the corner where the scratching had been. A sense of dread washed over her. The suffocating fog from outside bleeding into the room, filling her lungs, her thoughts. She couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Her body was locked in place, her mind reeling. The voice spoke again. But this time, it was not her sister's voice. It was deeper, more guttural. Elise strained her ears, listening for something, anything, to make sense of it. Elise. It was her name again. But it was distorted now, like a broken record, the words slipping between languages, becoming something incomprehensible. Marla? Elise whispered, her voice barely audible in the oppressive silence. Her heart pounded as she took a step toward the corner. The air grew colder with every step, thick and choking, and the scratching continued, louder now, a maddening rhythm. The light flickered back on, and then she saw it. A figure stood in the corner, hunched over, its back to her. It was tall, its body unnaturally thin, almost skeletal. The edges of its form were blurred, shifting like a mirage in the darkness. Elise's breath caught in her throat, her pulse racing. She wanted to scream, but her voice was trapped in her chest. The figure turned slowly, its head jerking to face her, and Elise froze, her body stiff with terror. It wasn't Marla. The face was gaunt, twisted, the eyes hollow black pits. The skin was stretched taut across the skull, its features sharp and elongated. It opened its mouth and the voice came again, only this time it wasn't just words, it was a sound, a horrific distorted cry that felt like it was tearing through her mind, breaking it open, pouring raw dread into her thoughts. Elise. The figure's mouth twisted as it spoke her name, its voice a horrible mockery of her sister's. Elise stumbled back, her hand flying to her mouth to stifle a scream, but it was already too late. The figure moved toward her with unnatural speed, the air growing colder with every step it took. Elise felt the coin in her pocket shift, cold and heavy, as though it were pulsing, calling to her, drawing her closer to the figure. She couldn't take it anymore. With one final desperate motion, Elise tore her gaze away from the creature and ran, stumbling into the hallway, her heart in her throat. The house felt endless, its walls closing in on her, the fog outside pressing against the windows like a living thing. But the whispers followed her, Elise. And the memory of Marla's face, fractured and fading, haunted her every step. The terror that had gripped Elise in the dead of night lingered in her bones even as the morning sun struggled to break through the thick fog that swallowed Ashwick whole. She had bolted out of the house last night, running without thinking, guided only by the primal urge to escape. But now, as she stood in her kitchen, the walls of her house felt oppressive, heavy, like they were pressing in on her. The whispers, though softer, still echoed through the air. She hadn't slept at, or the events of the night before. Marla's distorted, haunting visage, the creature in the corner of the room, replayed in her mind on an endless loop. Every time she tried to focus, the sound of that distorted voice calling her name reverberated through her mind, suffocating her thoughts. The coin still sat in her pocket, pressing against her side like a weight too heavy to bear. The sharp ring of the phone cut through the silence, pulling Elise out of her spiraling thoughts. She grabbed it immediately, her hands trembling, hoping it was Victor, hoping he had some answers. But instead, the voice on the other end was familiar, soft, and strangely soothing. "Elise," Dr. Louise Kepler said, her calm, steady voice a stark contrast to the chaos inside Elise's head. "It's me. I've been trying to reach you. Are you all right?" Elise closed her eyes, drawing in a slow, shaky breath. Dr. Kepler had been treating her for years now, ever since her synesthesia had begun to affect her life more than she could handle. The strange sensations she had, seeing colors when she heard sounds, hearing distorted echoes in quiet places, had always been a part of her. But lately, they had grown more erratic. Her memories were fractured, like broken glass, and she couldn't keep them together long enough to make sense of the past. "I don't know what's happening," Elise said quietly, her voice barely a whisper. "It's like I'm losing my mind. I saw her, I saw Marla again. But she wasn't herself, Dr. Kepler. And there's something else, something in the fog, something calling to me." The line was silent for a moment. Elise could almost hear Dr. Kepler processing the information, her professional calm keeping her words measured. "Elise," Dr. Kepler said softly, "I need you to come in. We need to talk. You're not well, but I can help you." "I don't know if I can come in today," Elise responded, her voice shaking. I think I'm losing my grip. There's something in Ashwick, something tied to the town, to Marla, and I can't let it go." "I understand," Dr. Kepler replied, her tone gentle but firm. "I want to help you, Elise, but we can't solve this from a distance. Please, come to the office. We'll work through it together." Elise hesitated for a long moment. Her mind was a mess of conflicting emotions, fear, confusion, and an overwhelming sense of dread that something was waiting just beyond her reach. But part of her, the rational part that still clung to a thread of sanity, knew Dr. Kepler was right. She needed help. "All right," Elise finally said. "I'll come in." The fog had grown thicker as Elise stepped out of the house. The air, so damp it felt like it was pressing against her skin. Her breath clouded in the cold morning air as she made her way to Dr. Kepler's office, each step feeling heavier than the last. Her eyes flicked to the corners of the street, half expecting to see Marla's figure in the distance, watching her from behind the mist. The walk to Dr. Kepler's office felt like it took hours. The town seemed to be holding its breath, the silence of Ashwick broken only by the distant chirp of unseen birds and the constant oppressive hum of the fog. Elise passed by the town square, the church ruins still looming in the distance. The image of the creature, its hollow, empty eyes, flashed in her mind again. She pressed her palm to her chest, as if to hold the panic inside. When she arrived at Dr. Kepler's office, the warmth of the building felt like a distant memory. The therapist's office was exactly as it always was, calm, inviting, and clinical. A single window looked out over the grey town, but the view was barely visible through the thick fog. The soft ticking of a clock in the corner was the only sound in the room as Dr. Kepler ushered Elise inside and asked her to sit in the familiar armchair. "Elise, tell me what happened last night," Dr. Kepler began, her voice calm and steady. "From the beginning." Elise hesitated, then began to speak. The words spilled out in a rush, her fears and confusion tangling together as she recounted the events, the coin, the whispers, the figure in the corner of her room. As she spoke, she could see Dr. Kepler's eyes carefully following her every word, her expression soft but focused. I don't understand it," Elise continued, her voice breaking as she remembered the distorted voice, the way the creature had called her name. "It's like the town is trying to pull me back in. I can feel it, like something's waking up. It's all tied to Marla, but I don't know how or why." Dr. Kepler's eyes narrowed slightly as she processed the information. "Elise, I think what you're describing could be linked to your synesthesia. Your brain is reacting to these experiences, these images, sounds, sensations, in a way that might be warping your perception. The emotional weight of your sister's disappearance, the unresolved trauma, could be triggering these hallucinations." Elise shook her head, her fingers digging into the arms of the chair. "No, it's more than that. It's not just in my head. I feel like I'm connected to it, to whatever happened to Marla. The town, Ashwick, is part of this. It's not just a memory. It's alive, and I don't know how much longer I can keep ignoring it." Dr. Kepler leaned forward slightly, her expression softening with concern. "I don't doubt that you're experiencing something real, Elise, but we need to explore this rationally. I want to help you, but we need to address this systematically. Let's start with what we can control, your emotions, your memories, and your perception of reality." Elise nodded slowly, though she wasn't entirely convinced. Something in her gut told her that it wasn't just her mind unraveling, that the forces at play here were far darker and more insidious than Dr. Kepler could understand. The whispers, the coin, Marla's face, it all pointed to something ancient, something that Ashwick had buried long ago. Before she could respond, a sudden sharp ringing broke the silence. Dr. Kepler's phone buzzed, an alert lighting up the screen. Elise glanced at it briefly, then back at her therapist. But Dr. Kepler's face had gone pale. "Sorry, Elise," Dr. Kepler said, her voice tight. "I need to take this." As Dr. Kepler answered the phone, Elise's gaze drifted toward the window. The fog outside had thickened even more, obscuring everything For a moment she thought she saw something moving within the mist. A figure, tall and unnervingly familiar, standing at the edge of the street. Her pulse quickened. It was Marla, or something that looked like her. Elise stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "I have to go." "Elise, wait," Dr. Kepler called out, her voice concerned. But Elise was already moving toward the door, the fog outside pulling her in, the figure in the distance beckoning her. "Elise." Dr. Kepler's voice grew sharper as she followed her into the hall, but Elise didn't stop. The whisper was back. "Elise." The fog in Ashwick had never seemed more oppressive. Elise's steps quickened as she moved through the streets, the mist swirling around her like an ever-tightening grip. She couldn't explain it, but she felt a deep pull in her chest, a compulsion to follow the figure she had seen in the fog. The twisted memory of Marla, or whatever it was that had appeared, haunted her every step. The sensation of being watched, of being drawn towards something ancient and unknowable, surged inside her. Her thoughts were fragmented. Dr. Kepler's voice echoed in her mind, urging her to slow down, to find clarity. But Elise couldn't stop. She had to understand. She had to know what was happening to her, to Ashwick, and most of all, to Marla. As she passed the old church ruins, something strange caught her eye. A glint of metal in the dirt, partially buried beneath the moss-covered stones. She hesitated, the fog swirling around her legs like it was alive, but the pull of the object was too strong. It felt like the coin, but this was different. Older, more tarnished, its surface covered in symbols she didn't recognize. She knelt down, her breath shallow as her fingers brushed the dirt away, revealing a small, rusted key. It was unlike any key she had ever seen. It had no clear purpose, no obvious lock it would fit, but the moment her fingers closed around it, an electric shock of recognition ran up her arm. Her vision blurred, and for a split second, she felt as though she were floating, detached from her body. A wave of nausea swept over her as the key pulsed with a strange warmth, its surface smooth against her skin. "Elise." The voice came again, clear, unmistakable, and closer this time. It was Marla's voice, but it was laced with something darker, something that didn't belong. The words were not a plea, they were a command. The fog thickened, curling around her feet like tendrils, and she stood up, clutching the key to her chest. Her heart raced. She had no idea where the figure was now, but she could feel its presence, a looming shadow just beyond her sight. Elise. This time, the voice came from behind her. Slowly, she turned, and there it was. The figure, standing in the distance, obscured by the dense fog, but unmistakably there. It was tall, impossibly tall, and its features were shrouded in shadow. But Elise could feel it. This thing was watching her, waiting. She stumbled backward, her foot hitting something sharp in the gravel, and she fell to the ground. For a moment her vision blurred completely, and the world around her spun. She closed her eyes, fighting the dizziness, but the sensation of something pressing in on her chest was unbearable. When she opened her eyes again, the figure was gone. Elise. She whipped around at the sound of the familiar voice, expecting to see Dr. Kepler, but it wasn't her therapist. It was Victor. His face was drawn, his eyes wide with concern, but his expression faltered when he saw the key in her hand. "Where did you find that?" he asked. His voice edged with a kind of fear Elise had never heard from him before. "I don't know," she said, her voice shaking. "It was buried in the ruins. I thought it was a part of it." Victor stepped forward cautiously, his gaze darting from the key to Elise, then back to the fog that still seemed to swallow the town whole. "Elise, this is part of the curse, isn't it? The key. It's connected to something older than this town. Elise began, but her words faltered as the fog seemed to close in tighter, wrapping around them. Both. Her hands were trembling, and she could feel the cold, damp air seeping into her bones. I think it's connected to Marla. Whatever happened to her, it's tied to this place. To the language, to the fog, to all of it. I can't keep running from it. Victor hesitated, his face contorting in confusion and fear. Elise, this is dangerous. You don't understand what this means. People have disappeared trying to uncover the secrets of Ashwick. Elise shook her head, her fingers tightening around the key. I know it's dangerous, but I can feel it. The town, it's awake, Victor. It's alive, and it's not going to let me go. Victor took a step back, his eyes narrowing. What do you mean it's awake? The fog, the key, it's all connected, Elise said, her voice breaking as the weight of her own words sank in. Marla's disappearance, the strange language she was researching, it's tied to the curse that's been buried in this town for generations. It's not just some myth. The people who disappeared, they didn't vanish. They were taken. Victor's face paled, his lips trembling. Taken? Yes, Elise whispered, her eyes wide with the dawning realization. And I think Marla was the first to fall into it. She was taken, and now I'm next. She gripped the key in her hand so tightly her knuckles turned white. The weight of it felt heavier than ever before, the strange warmth radiating from it, as if it were pulling her toward something, toward an answer she was not sure she was ready to face. Victor stood frozen for a moment, then reached out, as if to take the key from her, but Elise recoiled, clutching it tighter. No, she said, her voice firm. I have to do this. I have to finish what Marla started. Finish what? Victor asked, his voice rising with urgency. Elise, you don't even know what you're holding. You don't understand. This is part of the curse. It's a key to something ancient and horrible. It can't just be the key to the language or to the town's history. This is a doorway. Exactly, Elise said, her eyes fixed on the fog, her mind swirling with 1,000 fragmented thoughts. It's a doorway, and I think I'm meant to open it. Victor's face twisted with fear. Don't, Elise. You don't know what's on the other side. I think I already do, Elise whispered. The air around them grew colder, and the fog seemed to move, curling in on them like a living thing. Her mind flashed with memories of Marla, her sister, obsessed with the forgotten language, her sister lost to the town, to the curse. Elise could see her now, smiling at her from within the fog, her face no longer distorted, but whole again. Elise. Marla's voice echoed once more, softer now, like a whisper of hope. Elise took a deep breath, the key burning in her palm, as if it were calling her to step into the darkness. She had already come too far to turn back. I have to do this, she repeated, louder this time. I have to find Marla, and I have to end this curse. Victor stared at her for a long moment, his face full of regret, then nodded slowly, his voice barely above a whisper. If you go, you'll never be the same, he warned. But I can't stop you, can I? Elise shook her head, her heart pounding. No, you can't. With that, she turned toward the ruins of the church, the key gripped tightly in her hand. The fog seemed to beckon her forward, as if the town itself were waiting, and she felt an undeniable pull, the curse, the language, Marla, drawing her closer to the unknown. And so, Elise stepped into the fog, knowing she was crossing a threshold from which there would be no return. The fog hung thick in the air, its weight pressing against Elise's chest with each step she took toward the church ruins. The key in her hand felt warm, almost alive, as if it had a heartbeat of its own. The further she walked, the more the town of Ashwick seemed to fade away behind her, like she was stepping into another world entirely. The oppressive mist wrapped itself around her, muffling sound, until the only thing she could hear was the beating of her own heart, quick and frantic as she moved deeper into the silence. The church ruins loomed ahead, its broken walls rising like ancient tombstones, the stone foundations cracked and worn by centuries of neglect. The dark shadows beneath the archway seemed to beckon her, a hollow invitation that she couldn't resist. The structure had always been a place of mystery, even as a child. Elise remembered playing there with Marla, pretending to be explorers in some forgotten land. But today, the ruins felt different, darker somehow, as if they had become a gateway to something terrible. The air was colder now, each breath feeling heavier, as if the fog itself was seeping into her lungs. Elise's vision blurred as the fog thickened, wrapping around her like a shroud. The church's shadow cast a long, twisted figure across the ground, and for a moment, Elise thought she saw something move, a flicker of movement in the corner of her eye. Her pulse quickened. She stopped in her tracks, her hand instinctively tightening around the key. The whispers started again, softer now, almost imperceptible, but they were there, curling through the air like a faint breeze. Elise glanced around, but there was no one, just the ruins and the thick mist. Elise. Her name came in a whisper, but it wasn't Marla's voice. It was something else, something far colder, more distant. The tone was unfamiliar in a way that made her skin crawl. The air around her shifted, and Elise felt a presence, a weight. It was as though something was watching her just out of sight. She spun around, her heart racing, but there was nothing. No figure, no movement, just the swirling fog. Elise. It came again, sharper now, more insistent. She wasn't alone. Elise's breath hitched, the hairs on the back of her neck standing on end. She felt the oppressive weight of unseen eyes upon her, as though the fog itself were alive, watching, waiting. She stumbled backward, her foot hitting the uneven ground beneath her. The key in her hand pulsed with an eerie warmth, sending a jolt of unease through her. The whispers were louder now, overlapping, calling her name from all directions. The world around her seemed to close in, as though the fog was closing off. All avenues of escape! Elise! The voice was now close, far too close. Elise whirled around, her breath ragged, and there, just at the edge of her vision, she saw it. A figure, tall and cloaked in shadow, standing motionless in the doorway of the church ruins. Its presence was impossible to ignore, as if the very air bent around it. It didn't move, but its presence alone felt like a weight pushing against her chest. The figure didn't have a face, at least not one Elise could make out. It was just a shifting, dark shape, like smoke twisting in the wind, its edges blurring and warping. The fog seemed to coil around it, as though it was drawn to the entity, feeding it. Elise, the voice came again, deeper this time, emanating from the figure. It didn't feel like a whisper anymore. It felt like a command, a beckoning. Elise's heart raced as she felt the pull, the undeniable urge to move forward, to approach the figure, to step into the unknown. But fear rooted her to the spot. The creature in the fog, whatever it was, felt like it was made of something ancient, something tied to the curse that had gripped Ashwick. Elise could feel it in her bones. This wasn't just some hallucination, some twisted memory of her sister. This was real, and it was waiting for her to make a choice. Elise. The voice came again, and this time it was a deep, guttural sound, an echo of something far older than Ashwick itself. Elise took a step back, her fingers trembling around the key, the warmth of it burning through her skin. "No," she whispered, her voice shaking. "I'm not ready for this." The figure didn't move, but the air around it grew colder, the fog swirling violently, pushing in on her like an unseen force. Elise took another step backward, her breath coming in shallow gasps. She wanted to run, to leave this place, but her legs felt like lead, unwilling to obey. And then, just as she thought she couldn't bear it any longer, the figure spoke again. Its voice like ice against her spine. "You are already here." The words cut through her, sharp and final. They were not a question. They were an inevitability. Before she could process what had just been said, the figure moved. Slowly, deliberately. Its form shifted like liquid darkness, and it stepped forward, crossing the threshold of the ruined church. The fog parted around it like the opening of a curtain, revealing more of the creature's form, though it was still barely discernible. It seemed to shimmer with a dark, cold energy, like an entity made of shadow and sorrow. "Elise," it repeated, this time with more weight, more meaning. It was no longer a distant call, but a demand. "Come to me." The whispers grew louder, and Elise felt herself swaying, caught between terror and curiosity, between the need to escape and the overpowering urge to step forward. Her mind was unraveling, but the key, the warmth of it in her hand, kept her grounded. She couldn't explain it, but something about the key made her feel like she was connected to the very thing that stood before her. Like it was a part of her, like it had always been there. The figure seemed to pulse with an energy of its own, its presence suffocating. Elise could feel it deep within her chest now, a pressure that didn't come from the outside, but from inside her, as if the figure was in her soul, calling to the deepest part of her being. And then, with a sudden burst of clarity, Elise knew what she had to do. She stepped forward. As soon as her foot hit the ground, the fog seemed to surge, rushing in like a flood. The whispers converged into one sound, one voice, one word: "Come." The world around her twisted, the ruins, the fog, the figure. They all blurred into a singularity of darkness and light, as if the town itself were bending, warping, pulling her into it. She felt the weight of the key grow heavier as she moved toward the shadow, and as her hand reached out toward it, she felt a presence, something ancient and vast, pressing against her mind. And then, just as the figure reached out to her, its shadowy fingers brushing her own, she was consumed by the darkness. Elise's vision spun, the edges of reality blurring like the mist that had swallowed Ashwick whole. The dark figure, the presence, loomed before her, its shadow creeping over her as if it were trying to consume her whole. She could feel the key in her hand, burning with an intense, unbearable heat, like it was drawing the very life out of her. The darkness around her thickened, suffocating every breath she tried to take, until there was no air left to fill her lungs. The whispers grew louder, too loud to ignore, now a cacophony of voices blending into one, each one more insistent than the last. It was as if they were speaking directly into her mind, swirling through her thoughts, drowning her in their demand. "Come to me, Elise." Her body shook, but she couldn't stop herself from reaching out toward the shadow. She knew, deep down, that there was no turning back now. The key had led her here, to this moment, this place, and something in the darkness was calling to her, pulling her closer, deeper into its grip. Just as her fingers brushed the shadow's outstretched hand, she felt a jolt, a sharp, sudden pull that yanked her from the grasp of the figure. Its eyes, fog rippled around her like an ocean's wave, and she was thrown backward, stumbling, falling to the ground. When she hit the cold stone floor of the church ruins, the fog seemed to recede, pulling back like a curtain. Her breath came in ragged gasps, her body trembling with the intensity of what had just happened. The shadow was gone, but the weight of it lingered in the air, heavy and oppressive. "Elise," the voice came again, soft and insistent. This time, it wasn't the figure. It was a voice she recognized, one that sent a chill through her heart. "Victor," She forced herself to sit up, her head spinning as she tried to make sense of what was happening. The fog had cleared just enough for her to see the faint outline of Victor standing in the distance, his figure blurred and half hidden by the shifting mist. He was walking toward her, his face drawn with concern, but his eyes were wide with something more, a deep, palpable fear. "Elise," he said again, his voice trembling barely above a whisper, "you don't know what you've done." The fog around them began to shift again, twisting and warping like it was alive, and Elise felt an overwhelming sense of dread rise in her chest. The whispers were growing louder once more, mingling with the sound of Victor's voice like a hidden song she couldn't escape from. What happened?" Elise managed to choke out, still struggling to make sense of what she had just experienced. "Was that real? Was that Marla?" Victor's face twisted in anguish, his hand reaching out to her, but he stopped short. His fingers hovered in the air between them, trembling. "Marla," he repeated, his voice a broken whisper. "No, Elise, that wasn't her. That wasn't anything human." He stepped closer, but the closer he got, the more the fog seemed to thicken around him, as though the mist itself were keeping him at a distance. Elise could see the fear in his eyes now, the horror that he had been hiding, and it made her heart race even faster. "What do you mean?" Elise's voice was barely audible, but the words spilled out anyway. She could feel her skin tingling, with a mixture of fear and curiosity. "Who was it? What happened to Marla?" Victor hesitated, then took a deep breath, his gaze falling to the ground as if the words were too heavy for him to speak. "Elise, this town..." He paused, looking around as though expecting something to appear from the fog. "This town has been hiding something for a long time. Something that's been buried beneath the ruins of that church. And your sister, Marla, she wasn't the first to go missing. There have been others before her, and after her." "What do you mean, others?" Elise asked, her heart pounding. She could feel the weight of his words sinking in, and with them, a sense of terrible inevitability. "Who?" Victor stepped forward again, but this time, his movement was more cautious, his gaze darting toward the dark corners of the church. "There was a man, Jared Blackwood. He was the last one who tried to uncover the truth about the curse, about what's really going on in Ashwick, Elise," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "He died here, in the church ruins. But he didn't just die. He was..." Victor trailed off, his eyes searching her face as though he was afraid to say the words. "He was taken, just like Marla." The fog swirled around them both, thickening, pressing in like it had a life of its own. Elise felt it again, this sense of being watched. But it wasn't just the fog. It was something deeper, something tied to the very bones of the town. She gripped the key tightly in her hand, feeling its warmth radiating through her palm, and for a moment she thought she could hear it, the key, pulsing with an energy of its own, almost as if it were alive. "Jared Blackwood," Elise whispered, her mind racing. "He was the man who went missing." Victor nodded grimly. "Yes, he was a historian, an archaeologist, just like you and Marla. He came here to uncover the secrets of Ashwick's past, and in doing so, he opened something that should have stayed closed. He uncovered the truth behind the curse, and it consumed him. He died here, Elise, but not in the way you think. He didn't just die, he was erased, just like Marla was." Elise felt the ground beneath her tremble, as though the church ruins were awakening, stirring with ancient life. The whispers grew louder still, and the fog pressed closer, as if trying to choke out the truth that was finally coming to light. "He wasn't the only one," Victor continued, his voice hollow, like the weight of his own words was crushing him. There were others, a dozen, maybe more, people who tried to uncover the truth. But the town, this place, won't let them. It doesn't just take them, it changes them. It consumes them, Elise. They become part of the curse, and I think... His voice trailed off and he looked at her with dread in his eyes. I think it's trying to do the same to you. Elise, he said, his voice desperate. But before he could finish, there was a sound, a sudden, harsh crack like thunder, coming from deep within the ruins. It was followed by the unmistakable sound of shuffling footsteps, dragging slowly across the stone floor. Elise turned toward the source of the noise, her heart pounding. And then, through the thick fog, she saw him, Jared Blackwood. Or what was left of him. His body was emaciated, his skin stretched tight over his bones, his eyes hollow and black. His mouth was open in a soundless scream, and his hands were reaching toward them, as though begging for help. But Elise could see it now. The horror that had taken him. His body was moving, but it was no longer human. It was just another puppet, a vessel for the curse. He was one of the many who had been erased. Elise, Victor whispered, his voice trembling. It's too late. The figure of Jared Blackwood, what was left of him, staggered forward, his skeletal hands reaching out as though trying to grasp something, anything, to pull him from the depths of whatever hell he had become. His skin hung loosely, like tattered cloth stretched too thin over a frame that no longer belonged to a human being. His hollow eyes locked onto Elise, and for a moment there was an unsettling recognition in them, as if he knew her. As if he had always known her, even in his twisted, tortured state. Elise stumbled backward, her heart pounding in her chest. The fog around them seemed to shift and swirl with every movement of the creature, and she could feel the air grow thick with the weight of its presence. Jared's footsteps were slow, deliberate, dragging across the stone floor of the church ruins. The sound echoed in the air, sharp and unnatural. Elise. His voice was distorted, a rasping whisper that sounded like it was coming from deep within the earth, like something ancient and buried was clawing its way out. Help me. Elise's breath caught in her throat. She knew that voice. It was once human, once a man, someone who had walked this earth, someone who had believed in the same truths she had. But now, it was only a shadow of what it once was. She tried to move, but her legs felt like lead. Every step she took felt heavier, the air thicker, as if the very ground was trying to drag her down into the abyss with Jared. The key in her hand burned with a fierce intensity, the warmth pulsating with a rhythm that matched the frantic beating of her heart. She gripped it tighter, feeling the deep, suffocating pull of the town's curse, the weight of the history it carried. Victor stood frozen beside her, his face a mixture of horror and resignation. He reached out, his hand trembling, and for a moment, Elise thought he might try to pull her away. But then he hesitated, looking down at the ruins, his eyes narrowing as though searching for something in the darkness. Elise. Victor's voice was strained, almost a whisper. You can't save him. You can't save any of them. Elise tore her gaze away from Jared, her eyes darting to Victor. What do you mean? He's just like Marla. He didn't deserve this. Victor's expression softened, a deep sadness settling over him. He took a slow, deliberate step toward her. No one deserves this, Elise. But it's too late for him. Too late for all of them. The town, the curse. It doesn't just take lives. It steals souls. It erases people from existence. Elise's eyes locked onto Jared again. His skin was taut against his bones, his mouth still open, but no sound came from him anymore. His eyes were wide, pleading, empty of all recognition. He had become a hollow vessel, consumed by the very curse that had taken Marla, and countless others before her. But there has to be a way to fix it, Elise whispered, the words leaving her mouth before she could stop them. I can't just leave him like this. Victor shook his head, his voice heavy with sorrow. You don't understand, Elise. This curse, it's not something you can fix. There's no cure, no remedy. It's a part of Ashwick itself. It's woven into the fabric of this town, this place. There is only one thing you can do. What? Elise demanded, her heart racing, her hands trembling as she gripped the key tighter. Tell me. I'll do anything to fix it, to stop this. Victor hesitated, his eyes avoiding hers for a moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was almost a whisper, barely audible over the whispers of the fog. The only way to end it is to end Ashwick, to destroy this place, to sever the curse at its root. But doing so, he trailed off, his voice breaking. Doing so might mean you have to destroy yourself too. Elise recoiled, her breath catching in her throat. What do you mean, destroy myself? Victor's eyes met hers, filled with deep, overwhelming sorrow. The curse is part of you now, Elise, part of your soul. The moment you picked up that key, you crossed a line. You became part of Ashwick's darkness. To destroy the curse, you have to destroy what connects you to it. You have to sever the thread that ties you to this town. Elise's mind spun. The key, the fog, the whispers, they all felt connected, like the pulse of the town was in sync with her own heartbeat. She could feel the weight of it all, the years of loss, the mystery of Marla's disappearance, the pull of the curse, and the unsettling truth that Ashwick itself was alive, breathing, feeding off of its own secrets. But destroy herself? Elise couldn't fathom what Victor was suggesting. She had come so far. She had to save Marla. She had to stop the cycle. She had to... Elise! Victor's voice cut through her thoughts, sharp and urgent. Don't you understand? There's nothing left here to save. The people you're trying to save, they're gone. They were never just victims of the curse. They became part of it, part of the town. You're standing at the edge of a precipice, and if you don't make a choice now, if you don't destroy Ashwick, you will become like them. The words hit Elise like a slap in the face, and for a moment she was frozen, her mind wrestling with the horror of it all. The curse was not just a force that haunted the town. It was part of her very soul. And if she didn't act, she would become another lost soul, another shadow roaming these ruins forever. Her gaze flickered. Back to Jared Blackwood, his hollow eyes still fixed on her, but now something else was there. His face, what was left of it, twitched, as though he was trying to speak, to say something, to warn her. But no sound came from him, only the oppressive silence of the ruins and the ever-present whispers that threatened to tear her apart. Victor's words rang in her ears. You have to destroy Ashwick. The air around them thickened, the fog swirling with purpose. Elise's hand clenched around the key, the warmth of it now a searing heat that seemed to burn through her skin. It wasn't just a key. It was a part of the curse. And if she was ever going to stop it, she would have to do something she wasn't ready to do. She would have to destroy everything. The town, the fog, the memory of Marla. The key pulsed in. Her hand, and with it, a final realization settled over her. The only way to free herself from this nightmare, the only way to break the curse, was to let go of the very thing that had brought her here. The key, the town, her past. She would have to destroy the only thing that could save her, and in doing so, destroy herself as well. The choice was hers. The cold air of Ashwick pressed against Elise as she stood frozen in the crumbling doorway of the church ruins, the weight of Victor's words hanging over her like an invisible chain. The key burned in her palm, searing with heat, and for a brief moment, she could swear she felt it pulse, a heartbeat that didn't belong to her, but to the town, to the curse itself. She closed her eyes, fighting back the surge of panic threatening to overwhelm her. There was no way out of this now, no easy answers. You have to make a choice, Elise. Victor's voice was quiet but firm, cutting through the heavy silence of the ruins. But be warned, once you make that choice, there is no turning back. The town won't let you. The curse won't let you. His words hung in the air like an echo, reverberating in Elise's mind. She turned away from him, her thoughts spinning like the fog swirling around the ruins. The past few days, the strange happenings, the whispers, the vision of her sister. It was all connected to this. She knew that now. The coin, the key, the fog. It was all part of something much older, something she couldn't comprehend fully, but which she felt tied to in her very bones. Elise, please, Victor's voice softened. You don't have to carry this burden alone. I can help you. But Elise didn't hear him anymore. She was already walking away, her steps slow but determined, her eyes fixed on the horizon. The fog rolled back as if parting for her, but she could still feel the weight of the curse pressing against her chest, choking the air from her lungs. The library. Her mind wandered back to the one place in Ashwick where she knew answers could be found. The town library. It was an ancient building, half hidden behind overgrown ivy, its shelves filled with dusty tomes, forgotten archives, and records of the town's long history. She had been there before, years ago, when she and Marla had spent hours combing through old manuscripts. But now, it felt like a different place altogether. The library had changed since she last set foot inside. It had become a part of the town's sickness, an infected heart pulsing with the curse, waiting for her to return. Her thoughts sharpened as she stepped closer to the library, the grand stone pillars looming like dark sentinels. The heavy wooden doors creaked open on their own as if the library had been waiting for her. Inside, the silence was suffocating, the air thick with dust and the scent of aging paper. She had expected the faint familiar smell of old books, but it felt wrong, as if the very essence of the library had changed. As she walked further into the dimly lit space, the shelves seemed to stretch endlessly into the darkness, and she could feel the weight of the town's history pressing down on her. Every book on these shelves was a thread in the tapestry of Ashwick's curse, each one a part of the puzzle she had yet to solve. Elise, the whisper came again, and this time she wasn't sure if it was in her mind or in the very air around her. The sound was faint but distinct, like the flutter of paper or the rustle of a long-forgotten journal. Elise stopped, her breath catching in her throat. She looked around, but there was no one. The library was empty, just like it had always been, save for the rows of books and the forgotten echoes of the past. Elise. The voice was closer now. The whisper was no longer faint. It was clearer, as if the sound was coming from behind one of the bookshelves. She turned, her eyes scanning the room, but the space seemed endless, the shelves stretching farther than she had ever remembered. There was something there, something hidden in the deep shadows, a presence she couldn't quite place. The key burned in her hand, and the whispers became louder, more insistent, as if the library itself was alive, feeding off her every movement, pulling her deeper into its grip. Elise. The voice now sounded familiar, soft, gentle. It was Marla's voice, but this time Elise could hear the distortion. It wasn't the comforting tone she remembered. It was something darker, something that had been warped by the curse. Elise. She didn't have time to think, only to move. She followed the sound of the voice, her footsteps echoing in the silence of the library. The books seemed to shift. As she passed, their spines cracked and pages yellowed with age, but it wasn't the books that held her attention. It was the shadows, the dark spaces between the shelves, where she could feel the presence of something, someone waiting for her. She reached the back of the library, where the old wooden staircase wound upward into the dark, unreachable upper floors. It was there, in the shadows, that she saw it. A figure, barely visible in the dim light, standing motionless in the far corner of the room. The figure was tall, hunched slightly, its back to her, its face obscured by the dark. Elise. Marla's voice. She could hear it now, clearer than ever, the distortion gone. It was Marla, standing there, alive. It had to be her. Elise's heart hammered in her chest, and she took a step forward, drawn to the figure as if her legs were no longer her own. The whispers died down, leaving only the sound of her footsteps and the steady pulse of her heartbeat. She reached out, her fingers brushing against the figure's shoulder, and in that moment, the world seemed to freeze. The air went still, the weight of time itself pressing down on her. The figure turned, its face coming into focus, and Elise's blood ran cold. It wasn't Marla. The figure's face was a mask of decayed flesh, half rotted, its eyes wide and empty. It had no expression, no life, only the hollow gaze of something that had been long dead. The skin was stretched tight over its skull, and its mouth was open in a silent scream. It was not human. It was the shadow of something that had once been alive, but had been consumed, erased by the curse that haunted Ashwick. Elise stumbled backward, her breath catching in her throat. Her legs felt weak, and she almost collapsed. The key burned in her palm, and in that instant, she realized what was happening. The library wasn't just a place of knowledge. It was a prison, a place where the lost souls of Ashwick were trapped, their memories distorted, their bodies consumed. By the curse, the shadow reached out toward her, its decayed hand inches from her face. Elise wanted to scream, to run, but her feet were rooted to the ground. The whispers had returned, louder now, overlapping, screaming in her mind, demanding that she understand. The shadow opened its mouth, and this time, the voice wasn't Marla's. It was the voice of Ashwick itself, the town, the curse, the ancient thing that had always been waiting for someone like Elise. Elise. And then, the darkness rushed forward, consuming her, pulling her into the void where time no longer mattered, where nothing existed but the endless whispers of the town. The darkness swallowed Elise whole, and for a moment she was lost, pulled into a void where sound and light had no meaning, where the very air felt like it was made of shadows, thick and unyielding. The whispers returned, louder than ever, their voices growing in intensity, their demands more urgent, insistent. Elise could no longer tell where they came from, or even what they were saying. All she could hear was the sound of her own heart, thudding painfully in her chest, and the eerie, pulsing warmth of the key still clenched in her hand. And then, just as suddenly, the darkness lifted. Elise gasped as the world around her shifted, like waking from a dream. She was no longer in the library. The walls of the room, the bookshelves, everything had vanished. Instead, she stood in the middle of an ancient stone chamber, a place so old that the very air seemed to tremble with the weight of centuries. The walls around her were covered in dark, intricate carvings, and the ground beneath her feet was smooth, polished stone, worn by the passage of time. The chamber was dimly lit, the only illumination coming from the faint glow of symbols carved into the walls, faintly shimmering with an eerie, unnatural light. It was a language Elise didn't recognize. The symbols were fluid, ever-shifting, their forms twisted in a way that felt almost alive. As she looked closer, the symbols seemed to pulse, their rhythms mirroring the beating of her own heart, as if they were speaking directly to her. Elise took a step forward, her feet light on the stone floor, her body moving on its own accord, drawn to the center of the room. At its heart stood a tall pedestal, its surface covered in more symbols. Symbols that were somehow familiar, yet completely foreign. On top of the pedestal lay an open book, its pages yellowed with age, the ink faded, but still legible. Her pulse quickened. This was what she had been searching for, answers. This was the place where the curse had been born, the place where the language had first been written. But now that she was here, the weight of it all felt suffocating. The room pulsed with a deep, rhythmic energy, a sense of something ancient and forgotten, something that had always been waiting for her. The book, though open, appeared to be bound by a strange, shimmering energy. The pages fluttered, as though caught in a breeze that didn't exist, and as Elise reached out to touch it, she felt a jolt of recognition, like a memory just beyond her reach. She pulled her hand back for a moment, the air around the pedestal crackling with energy, but the pull of the book was too strong. She had to know. Her fingers hovered above the pages for a moment, and then, with a deep breath, she placed them gently on the ancient paper. The moment her fingers made contact with the book, the symbols on the walls surged to life, shifting and twisting around her. The entire room seemed to come alive, the symbols glowing brighter, the air thickening with energy. Elise gasped, pulling her hand back, but it was too late. The symbols on the walls were no longer just symbols. They were voices speaking to her, chanting in the same distorted language she had heard in the fog, in her dreams, in the whispers that had followed her. Elise couldn't understand the words, but she could feel their meaning deep within her chest, in the very core of her being. They were old words, words of power, words that held the key to the curse. And in that moment, something inside her snapped into place. The language, the old tongue, wasn't just a means of communication. It was a force that had been buried beneath Ashwick, waiting for someone to unlock it, to awaken it. And now, Elise had done just that. The book shuddered violently as if it were alive, its pages flipping wildly, the language on the pages glowing brighter with each word it revealed. Elise stepped back, her breath quick and shallow, her heart pounding in her chest. The words on the page seemed to rearrange themselves, the meaning becoming clearer, like a puzzle slowly falling into place. But what she saw was worse than she could have imagined. The language on the pages was a ritual to summon something powerful, something otherworldly. The book spoke of the original settlers of Ashwick, ancient, forgotten people who had stumbled upon something far older than their own knowledge, something that existed beyond the bounds of time and space. And when they had learned this language, they had unknowingly called forth an entity that had been buried in the land, waiting to be awakened. They had made a pact with it, one that would bind the town to its curse for eternity. The pact was simple. In exchange for the entity's power, the town would be bound to it. Its people would serve as vessels, as conduits for its will. And every generation, a chosen few would be drawn to the town, driven by the language to uncover the truth, to open the doors that should remain shut. And that was why Elise had come here. That was why she had been drawn to Ashwick. Why she had been led to the key, to the coin, to the book. She was part of the cycle. She had been chosen to awaken the curse, to bring it back into the world. But the ritual required a final step. The final page of the book was covered in dark, jagged symbols, the ink so thick and black it seemed to bleed from the page. The ritual needed a sacrifice, a soul, a life, something to feed the curse and bind it to the living world. Elise could feel her stomach churn as the realization hit her. The entity, it, had been using her, pulling her deeper into its grasp, feeding on her fear, on her search for answers. And now, the ritual was almost complete. Elise, the voice came again, but this time, it wasn't the whispers, it wasn't the entity, it was Marla. Her voice, distant but clear, echoed through the chamber. Elise turned toward the sound, her heart racing. Marla, Elise whispered, her voice hoarse as if she had lost her ability to speak properly. The room shifted. The symbols on the walls flickered, and the book trembled. And then, from the shadows at the edge of the room, a figure stepped forward. Marla. But it wasn't Marla as she remembered her. Her face was pale, her eyes hollow, her skin stretched too tight across her bones. She was no longer the sister Elise had loved. She had become part of the curse, a vessel for it, a reflection of the horror that Ashwick had borne for so long. Elise, Marla whispered again, but the sound was not kind. It was cold, hollow, and it echoed like the distant scream of someone lost forever. You've done it. You've freed me. Elise felt a cold, sharp chill pierce her chest. Marla's figure twisted, shifting in the light like a shadow, fading, becoming more and more insubstantial. I never wanted this for you, Elise whispered, her voice breaking as she stepped back, the book still in her hands. The whispers in her mind were deafening now, the words growing louder, more demanding. Marla's figure flickered once more, and for a moment Elise could swear she saw her sister's face, her eyes filled with sadness, not malice. You don't have to do this, Marla whispered. But then her form dissolved completely into the mist. The book in Elise's hands began to burn, the pages flipping violently, and the symbols on the walls writhed like living creatures. Elise felt the weight of the town pressing down on her, the curse pulling at her soul. The final choice was hers. The room began to vibrate, a low hum that seemed to resonate deep within Elise's chest, sending a ripple of unease through her. The key in her hand throbbed with an unnatural pulse, its warmth growing unbearable, as though it were a living thing. Her thoughts spiraled out of control, disjointed and fragmented, as the words from the book blurred in her mind, and the whispers in the air grew louder, more insistent. The language, the ancient tongue, was no longer just something she could hear. It was inside her, flowing through her veins, rewriting her very sense of self. Elise, the voice came again, but this time it wasn't just a whisper. It was a command, clear and sharp, resonating deep within her mind, as though it were pulling at something buried deep in her soul. Elise's hands trembled, the key burning against her skin. The fog, thick and suffocating, pressed in on her, swirling around the stone chamber, filling her senses with the feeling of being watched, of being consumed. Elise. The voice was no longer distant. It was close, too close, and it wasn't just a voice she could hear. It was a presence, a force inside her mind. Elise felt it, its pressure against her consciousness, as if something was trying to break through. Something ancient, something powerful. Her pulse raced, and she could feel her body trembling as though it was fighting against itself. The book still lay open in front of her, its pages fluttering violently, the symbols shifting and morphing before her eyes like they were alive, feeding on her fear. It wasn't Marla's voice, not anymore. It was something else, something far darker. Elise, you have opened the door. The words crashed into her mind, a torrent of meaning and power that she could no longer ignore. The room around her seemed to dissolve, the walls flickering in and out of existence, as if they were nothing more than a mirage. The only thing that remained was the voice, the force that was speaking directly to her, as though it had always been there, waiting for this moment. Her head throbbed, her thoughts splintering under the weight of its words. She tried to resist, to break free from the invisible grip that was tightening around her mind. But it was futile. She could feel herself slipping, like she was losing her grip on reality itself, like the very fabric of her existence was being unraveled. Elise, you have opened the door, and now you belong to me. The voice swirled around her like a wind rising within her chest, and Elise stumbled backward, her hands gripping the book, trying to steady herself. But she couldn't. There was no ground beneath her feet, no solid foundation to cling to. The room was spinning, the walls collapsing in on her, and the whispers were louder, more insistent, drowning out everything else. The curse had been waiting for her, waiting for someone who was connected. Elise wasn't just a bystander, she was the catalyst. She was the key to awakening the curse, to bringing it back into the world. And now that it was free, now that it had been released, there was no turning back. Elise's chest tightened as she tried to focus, tried to push back against the overwhelming presence inside her mind. The force was too powerful, too ancient to resist, and she could feel herself weakening. It was feeding on her fear, on her confusion, twisting her thoughts into something unrecognizable. Elise. The voice called her name again, and this time it wasn't just inside her head. It was in the room surrounding her, echoing from all directions. It was in the walls, in the stones, in the very air. She could feel it pressing against her, wrapping around her like chains, tightening with every breath she took. The key in her hand burned hotter, its heat spreading through her body, suffocating her. She could feel her skin, her very essence, starting to melt into the darkness, as if she were being absorbed, consumed by the curse. But then, through the haze of pain and terror, something inside Elise snapped. She couldn't do this. She couldn't let it take her. She couldn't become a part of this darkness. I won't let it consume me. With a desperate cry, she pushed the key away from her chest, throwing it to the ground. It clattered against the stone floor, its power still pulsing, still hungry, but Elise forced herself to step away from it. She stumbled backward, her vision blurring, her mind struggling to stay intact. She had to make a choice. The room around her seemed to shift again, the walls closing in, the fog thickening, suffocating her. But Elise knew she couldn't stay here. She couldn't let the curse take her soul, take everything she had fought for. But there was something else, something that was calling her, pulling her toward the door she had opened, toward the thing she had released. It was inside her. It was part of her now. The fog was everywhere now, swirling around her, and Elise felt herself falling. She wasn't just falling into the room anymore, she was falling into herself. Her mind was slipping, her grip on reality loosening as the voice, the force inside her, grew louder, more demanding. Elise, come. The room began to fade, replaced by flashes of her past, the memories of Marla, the feeling of her sister's hand in hers, the warmth of their shared laughter. But the memories began to twist, becoming darker, more distorted, until the faces of the people she loved were no longer familiar. They were just shadows, warped reflections of the curse that had taken her sister, that had taken everything she had ever known. And then, through the fog, she saw it. A figure, tall, cloaked in shadow, its face obscured. It stepped forward, not from the door, but from within the mist itself. Elise's heart stopped as she recognized it. It was Marla. But it wasn't the Marla she had known. This was something darker, something twisted, and it spoke in the same voice that had been calling to her. Elise, come to me. But Elise knew. She knew what this was. This wasn't her sister. It wasn't even her anymore. This was the curse, the entity, the thing that had been pulling her toward Ashwick, toward the old tongue. It had taken Marla just as it would take her if she didn't stop it. Elise, come to me. The voice echoed one final time, and Elise felt herself drawn forward, her body moving of its own accord. She was too weak to resist now. She had opened the door, and now it was taking her. But then something shifted. In the darkness, in the twisting fog, Elise felt a flicker of something familiar, something real. Her memories of Marla, her sister's laughter, her face. These were the things that held her together. These were the things that the curse couldn't take from her. The truth of who she was. With one last surge of strength, Elise pulled herself free, her mind clearing for a fleeting moment. She reached out and grabbed the key, its power surging into her, the warmth of it flooding her veins. "I won't let you win." The key pulsed in Elise's hand, its warmth seeping through her fingers like a living force. She could feel it. Something had shifted, something had broken free. The whispers that had overwhelmed her mind began to fade, replaced by a deafening silence. Her head was spinning, but she held on, her breath shallow and ragged as she tried to focus. The stone chamber around her seemed to stretch infinitely, the walls pulsating with the energy of the curse. The symbols on the walls now glowed with a malevolent intensity, their shapes warping and shifting as though they were alive. Elise knew she was standing on the precipice of something far greater than herself, something ancient, something tied to Ashwick's very existence. She was no longer just a witness to the horror. She was a part of it. The fog, thick, suffocating, pressed in from all sides, crawling over the stone floor like it had a will of its own. Elise's hands trembled, but she steadied herself, her fingers tightening around the key. The ritual, the language, the entity, it was all connected. It had always been connected to her family, to the town. Ashwick had fed on its secrets for generations, and now it was demanding its due. A low rumble began to vibrate through the ground, a deep, guttural sound that made the stones beneath Elise's feet tremble. The air was thick with static, a buzzing hum that felt like it was trying to shake her very soul. The darkness, the curse, was waking. The town was waking. Elise. Her voice came again. It was her sister's voice, but it was different now, distorted and hollow, like a broken echo. It was more than just a sound. It was a presence, one that pressed down on her, tightening around her chest like a vice. Elise felt it, the pull. The curse had always been waiting for her, drawing her in, feeding off her search for answers. It was waiting for her to open the door, to awaken it. And now there was no turning back. The ground beneath her cracked open with a loud, deafening noise, and Elise stumbled backward, her heart pounding in her chest. The key in her hand burned hotter, the power inside it growing stronger, as though it were feeding off the energy around her. The whispers intensified again, rising to a maddening crescendo as the fog began to shift and change, writhing like an animal. Elise. The voice was closer now, much closer. Elise's head snapped to the side and her breath caught in her throat. In the midst of the fog, standing in the shadows, was a figure, tall, looming. The same figure she had seen before, the same one that had haunted her dreams. The figure was no longer a mere shadow, no longer a distant shape in the fog. It was, here in the flesh, Marla, or something that looked like her. Her face was pale, hollow, stretched thin across her skull, her eyes black and empty. Her lips twisted into a smile that was both cruel and empty. The curse had taken her, consumed her. She was a vessel now, just like the others who had fallen prey to Ashwick's dark pull. Elise could feel it, could feel the curse's hold on her sister, her body and soul twisted by the very thing Elise had set in motion. Elise. Marla's voice, cold and hollow, echoed through the chamber. Her smile widened, an unsettling grin that made Elise's skin crawl. You should have never come here. You should have never opened the door. The darkness in the room seemed to deepen, the walls around her twisting and contorting as if the very stone were alive, alive with hunger. Elise tried to speak, to make sense of what was happening, but the words wouldn't come. Her throat, felt tight, constricted. The fog pressed in, the air thick with the oppressive weight of the curse, and the presence of her sister, her lost, twisted sister, hovered over her like a shadow. "You can't escape," Marla whispered, her eyes never leaving Elise. "You opened the door. You freed me. But now you are part of me, part of Ashwick." Elise shook her head, her mind spinning, her thoughts colliding like shards of glass. "No," she gasped. I didn't mean to. I just wanted to save you." A low, sinister laugh echoed from Marla's lips, reverberating through the room like a curse itself. "Save me? You think you can save anyone from Ashwick? You can't save yourself, Elise. You've become part of it. You've always been part of it. You can't undo what's been done." The words struck Elise like a blow to the chest. She staggered back, her eyes darting to the walls of the chamber, the symbols still glowing, pulsating, alive with power. She could feel the presence of the curse, like a force pressing against her mind, pushing against her very soul. It was pulling at her, trying to drag her deeper into its grip. "Elise." Marla's voice was soft now, almost tender. "Come to me. You've always been meant for this town, for me." Elise's heart twisted in her chest, but she refused to step forward. She would not, could not, become another victim. She wouldn't let the curse take her, wouldn't let it consume her the way it had consumed Marla. With trembling hands, Elise raised the key high above her head, feeling its power surging through her. The air crackled, and the fog seemed to shudder in response, as if the key itself was a weapon against the curse. Elise felt a surge of strength, an overwhelming wave of defiance, as the key burned brighter in her hand. "No," she whispered through clenched teeth. "I won't let you win." The room seemed to explode into chaos. The fog thickened, swirling violently around her, the ground trembling beneath her feet. The symbols on the walls flickered, growing brighter, more intense, until they were blinding. Elise could feel the curse fighting back, the force trying to pull her into the darkness, into the heart of Ashwick's eternal nightmare. "Elise," Marla's voice came again, softer, almost pleading. "You've opened the door. You can't close it. You can't undo what's been done." But Elise's mind was clear now. She had opened the door, but she was not going to let it close on her. She would not be another lost soul, consumed by the curse. She would fight. With one final desperate cry, Elise raised the key high above her head and brought it crashing down onto the ground. The moment it hit, the entire room seemed to shudder, the air crackling with energy as the symbols on the walls screamed in protest. A bright flash of light erupted from the key, blinding her as the chamber around her began to collapse. And then, as the light swallowed her whole, Elise felt herself falling into the unknown, into a darkness deeper than anything she had ever known. But this time she wasn't afraid. She had made her choice. Still here? Brave. Or maybe you just like the feeling of being watched. Like, subscribe, and drop your time and location in the comments, so we know who's still out there. Now breathe slow. The worst is coming. When the light faded, Elise found herself standing in the middle of an unfamiliar place. The air was thick with the scent of decay, and the ground beneath her feet was soft, damp, like wet earth. The fog from Ashwick had followed her, creeping in around the edges of her vision, its oppressive weight pressing in on her chest. She staggered forward, her breath shallow, heart racing. Her body was still trembling from the intense surge of energy that had pulsed through her moments before. The key, still clutched tightly in her hand, no longer burned with the same searing intensity, but it pulsed faintly, like it had a heartbeat of its own. Elise's eyes darted around. She was in a vast, dimly lit space, a cavern of some sort, its jagged stone walls stretching high above her, disappearing into shadow. The air was cool and stagnant, the silence almost deafening. But then, from deep within the cavern, a low hum reverberated through the stone, a vibration that seemed to come from the very ground beneath her. She could feel it in her bones, in the pit of her stomach, like a warning. For the first time, Elise truly felt the weight of what she had done, the consequences of her actions. The ritual, the key, the opening of the door. She had freed something, she had awakened it, and now she was standing in the heart of its power. The town was no longer just a place of fog and whispers. It was something alive, breathing, feeding off the energy she had unwittingly released. She took a step forward, her boots crunching softly against the damp earth, the fog swirling at her feet, as though it were alive. She wasn't sure how long she had been standing there, whether it was minutes or hours, but the sense of disorientation was overwhelming. The weight of her choices, the curse that now wrapped itself around her, was too much to bear. Her thoughts were fractured, torn between the memory of her sister and the presence of the entity that had taken her. There was no going back now. The line had been crossed. The key pulsed again, the warmth returning with a fierce, hungry energy. Elise raised it in front of her, the faint light shimmering in the dark cavern, casting long shadows on the walls. She could feel its power, the power of the language, of the curse. It was as though it was tied to her, woven into her very being. But as she stared at it, the air around her shifted, as though something was stirring within the depths of the cavern, something waiting to emerge. Elise. Her name echoed in the darkness, soft at first, then growing louder, more insistent. Her breath caught in her throat. It was the same voice, the one she'd been hearing since the moment she had stepped into Ashwick. But this time it wasn't just a whisper. It was a command, a presence, filling the cavern, reaching out to her like a beckoning hand. Elise. She spun around, her eyes searching the shadows, but there was no one there, no figure in the darkness, no sign of the entity that had been calling her. Yet she felt it, its presence, close, wrapping itself around her, suffocating her. The sound of the voice wasn't coming from one direction. It was everywhere, inside her head, in the walls, in the very stones beneath her feet. Elise. The voice was different now, closer. It wasn't just the curse anymore. It wasn't just the entity. It was her. Marla. Elise's heart skipped a beat. She turned sharply to the left, her breath caught in her chest. Through the swirling fog, she saw a figure, a faint, distorted silhouette standing just at the edge of the darkness, almost too still to be real. Marla. Elise whispered, her voice trembling, as the figure began to move forward, stepping into the dim light. It was her. It had to be. Her sister's face appeared from the fog, her eyes hollow and dark, her skin as pale as bone, stretched too tightly across her skull. Her lips parted in a slow, eerie smile, one Elise remembered all too well, but now twisted, like it had been contorted by something terrible. Marla, Elise breathed, her heart pounding in her chest. But the figure didn't respond, not with the voice she had once known. Instead, it spoke in a tone that was not Marla's, but the voice of Ashwick itself, the curse she had awakened. "You've freed me." Elise stepped back, her body shaking with both fear and disbelief. She reached out instinctively, as if her sister's presence could somehow anchor her in the madness she had unleashed. But the closer she got, the more the figure began to shift, to warp. It no longer had the familiar warmth of Marla, but something darker, colder, as if her sister had been consumed by the very thing Elise had set in motion. Elise, the voice, the curse, continued, now a dissonant chorus of whispers, all blending into one, growing louder. "You have awakened me. You have become part of me. The figure in front of her flickered, its edges dissolving into the fog, its form changing, growing, until it was no longer just a person at all. It was a creature, a mass of shadow and mist, tendrils of darkness swirling around it. Its eyes, those empty, hollow pits, focused on Elise, as though it were trying to reach inside her to drag her into the abyss. Elise, you are mine. The words struck Elise like a physical blow, a powerful force that crushed the air from her lungs. Her mind spun, the edges of reality blurring again. She wasn't just facing the curse now, she was facing herself. This was no longer about Ashwick or the town. It was about her. The key, the door, the language. It had all led to this moment. She could feel the weight of the curse pressing on her chest, suffocating her, pulling her into the darkness. The figure, the twisted version of Marla, stepped closer. Its presence, overwhelming, its power seeping into Elise's skin, her soul. Every memory, every thought she had was slipping away, replaced by the crushing weight of the curse's influence. "Elise, you've opened the door," the voice said again, now, a twisted reflection of her sister's tone, softer but filled with malice. "And now you belong to me." She wanted to scream, to fight, but her body wouldn't obey. The fog tightened around her, the mist curling like claws, pulling her deeper into the darkness. The key in her hand burned hotter, its power rising. With every heartbeat, she could feel it. The door was open, the curse was free, and there was no way to close it, no way to stop it. Elise. The voice coiled around her again, a soft whisper that burned through her thoughts. "You were always meant for this. You were always meant to belong to me." With a final, desperate cry, Elise raised the key, her hands trembling. And with every ounce of strength she had left, she forced herself to speak the words she had feared. The words from the book, the words that would seal her fate. "I command you to break." The cavern shook, the ground beneath her feet cracking open as the shadows began to writhe, twisting and distorting as the power of the key collided with the force of the curse. The very walls seemed to scream as the language spilled from her lips, the energy crashing through the cavern like a storm, drowning everything in its wake. And then, the air in the cavern crackled with an overwhelming surge of energy, as Elise's words, the ancient command, reverberated through the very fabric of the curse. Her body shuddered with the weight of what she had unleashed, the very stone beneath, her feet trembling in response. The fog swirled around her, thick and suffocating, as if trying to pull her back into its suffocating grasp. Her vision blurred as the world around her flickered between reality and something far darker. Something she had never anticipated. For a moment, everything was silent. The whispers, the distant screams, all fell away, leaving only the sound of Elise's ragged breathing. She stood there, hands still gripping the key, her heart hammering in her chest. The cavern was no longer just a place, no longer a space of forgotten stone. It had become a living thing, alive with the power of the curse. Elise could feel it pressing in on her, pulling her in every direction. But she had done it. The words had worked. Or had they? "Elise," the voice, came again. But it was no longer Marla's, no longer distorted by the curse. It was pure, chilling, powerful. The very air seemed to bend around it, its power too much for her to bear. She could feel it deep in her chest. The entity had heard her command, and it had answered. But this wasn't the moment of triumph she had imagined. No, it was worse, far worse. The seal, the one she had broken, was deeper than she had ever known. It wasn't just Ashwick that had been consumed. It was her too. She looked up, her gaze meeting the swirling mist that filled the cavern, and in that fog she saw it, the shape that had haunted her dreams, the figure that had stalked her every step in Ashwick. It was no longer a distant memory. It was here, right before her, a dark silhouette that shifted and flickered, almost not human at all. Its presence was vast, infinite, a void that sucked the very light from the room. It was the thing that had been waiting in the shadows all along, the entity that had woven itself into the fabric of Ashwick. The air thickened with its power, the walls of the cavern vibrating as it moved toward her, its shape growing clearer with each passing second. It was not a man. It was not even an animal. It was a thing, a presence that stretched beyond the physical. It was made of shadows, of things Elise could not begin to understand. Its eyes, dark, hollow, empty, locked onto hers, and in that moment, she felt as though her soul was being consumed by its gaze. "You've opened the door," the voice echoed, now coming from the entity itself. A voice that was neither male nor female, neither young nor old. It was a voice older than time itself, ancient and cold. It was the voice of the curse, the thing Elise had unleashed, the thing that had always been there, hiding beneath Ashwick's fog, waiting for someone like her to awaken it. "Do you know what you have done?" the entity continued, its voice reverberating in the cavern, shaking the very stones beneath Elise's feet. "You think you can control me? You think you can break the seal and escape the consequences?" Elise's breath caught in her throat. She felt the weight of its words. Every syllable was a crushing blow to her spirit, to her very existence. She had thought she could stop it, that by breaking the seal, she could rid herself of the curse. But it wasn't that simple. The entity wasn't just tied to Ashwick. It was tied to her bloodline, to the very soul of the town. She had opened the door, but she had opened it for herself as much as for the town. The curse had claimed. "No," Elise whispered, the words slipping from her lips before she could stop them. "I didn't mean for this. I didn't mean for it to be this way." The entity moved closer, its form shifting like smoke, its shape constantly warping, as if it existed in a space outside of reality. Elise wanted to scream, to run, but her legs felt like they were glued to the ground. She couldn't escape. The curse had her now. It had her soul, her memories, her very essence. The entity's form became clearer, and Elise saw it, a twisted, monstrous figure, half human and half something else, something worse. It had the shape of a man, but its skin was covered in writhing shadows, and its mouth, wide and jagged, was filled with rows of teeth that seemed to stretch on forever. Its arms reached out toward her, each limb like a tendril of darkness, bending and twisting unnaturally. "Elise," the entity crooned. Its voice was like a lover's whisper, but laced with venom. "You are mine now." The cavern seemed to narrow around her, the stone walls pressing in as the entity loomed over her, its presence suffocating. Elise felt herself slipping away, her body and mind being consumed by its power. She was no longer just Elise. She was part of Ashwick. She was part of the curse, and there was no escape. But even as the entity's darkness wrapped around her, there was something deep within her that refused to break. She clutched the key tighter, the faint light from it flickering, and she could feel the power surging through her. There was still a part of her that fought back, still a shred of the girl she had once been. The entity's mouth twisted into a smile, its eyes gleaming with cruel amusement. It could feel her resistance, and it relished it. "You think you can fight me?" it sneered. "You are nothing but a vessel, a conduit for the curse. You cannot break free." But Elise wasn't listening anymore. The pain in her chest, the suffocating weight of the entity's power, only sharpened her focus. She had come too far to let this thing consume her, to let it erase her from existence. "No," she said again, louder this time, her voice shaking with the intensity of her defiance. I'm not your vessel. I'm not your puppet. The key in her hand flared with a burst of light, and Elise felt the power inside her surge. The energy that had been growing inside her, the energy that had awakened the curse, was now rising up, pushing back against the entity. The light from the key grew blinding, filling the cavern with an intense, pure radiance. The entity recoiled, its form flickering, shifting, as though it were in pain. Elise felt the connection between them growing weaker, the grip of the curse loosening. It was fighting back, but she had the key. She had the power to break the cycle. Elise, no! The entity roared, its voice crackling with anger and fear. You cannot destroy me. I won't let you win, Elise said, her voice steady now, filled with resolve. You won't control me, not anymore. With a final, determined cry, she thrust the key forward, into the heart of the entity's darkness. The light exploded outward, filling the cavern with a blinding brilliance, and the ground shook violently, the very stone beneath her feet cracking apart. And then, as the light reached its peak, there was nothing. No sound, no mist, no fog. Just silence. For a moment, Elise stood in the quiet, gasping for breath. The key still clutched tightly in her hand. The air was still, and the weight that had pressed on her chest for so long was gone. But she didn't know if it was over, Adana. She won? Or was the curse simply lying in wait? The silence stretched, and Elise turned slowly, her eyes scanning the dark, empty cavern. She had broken the seal, but at what cost? The silence in the cavern was deafening. Elise stood at its center, her breath shallow, heart pounding, as the final echoes of the curse's power seemed to fade away. The fog that had clung to the air like a living thing had disappeared, leaving her in the unsettling stillness of the stone chamber. The light from the key had faded too, leaving her standing in near darkness, the faintest glimmer of twilight creeping in through cracks in the cavern's walls. But despite the quiet, the oppressive weight of the curse still lingered, hanging in the air like a phantom, a shadow that refused to be banished completely. Elise could feel it, deep inside her chest, a faint pull, an echo of something that remained tethered to her. The entity, whatever it had been, was gone, but was it truly finished? Or had she only delayed its return? For a long moment, Elise stood motionless, fighting the sense of vertigo that washed over her, fighting the temptation to sink into the silence and lose herself in it. She had made her choice. She had destroyed the seal. She had shattered the curse. But the cost was far greater than she could have imagined. The key burned faintly in her hand, a reminder of everything she had endured, everything she had lost. Elise. The voice came again, familiar and distant all at once. She knew it immediately. Marla. Her eyes widened as the cold, icy weight of the curse twisted in her stomach. It wasn't a voice from the past. It wasn't a memory. It was here. It was, still, in the cavern. And this time, it wasn't just the echo of a curse that had tainted Ashwick. It was something much more personal. The voice was not just a part of the language that had been spoken in Ashwick, not just a force of ancient malevolence. It was her. Elise turned slowly, her pulse quickening, her body still weak from the tumultuous battle she had just fought. The air seemed to hum, vibrating with energy, and from the shadows she saw her sister's figure again. This time, though, it was clearer. There was no mist or distortion. Marla was standing there, not as a ghost, but as a living, breathing person. Her eyes locked onto Elise's, but they were wrong. They were empty, hollow, as if the very soul of her sister had been consumed, leaving only the vessel behind. Elise. Marla's voice echoed in the cavern, her tone cold and empty, like an echo from beyond the grave. You have chosen. You have opened the door and let me out. But now you must understand, there is no escape from me. There is no escape from Ashwick. Elise's heart raced, as she took a step back. Her sister's face twisted, her smile no longer a comforting memory, but something darker, something horrific. The soft, familiar features Elise had once adored were stretched and contorted. Marla's form shimmered in the dim light, flickering as though she were a half-formed illusion, constantly shifting between light and shadow. "Elise," Marla said again, her voice laced with something far colder than it should have been. "The town chose you. It chose you long before you realized it. You were always meant to bring the curse to life." "No," Elise whispered, her throat constricting. "I didn't mean to. I didn't want this. I wanted to save you." Marla's expression darkened, and her smile widened, a chilling grin that seemed to stretch too far across her face. "You were never meant to save me, Elise. I was just the beginning. I was the first of many. But now you have become part of the town, part of the curse." Elise's breath caught in her throat. The truth began to settle around her like a weight. She had opened the door, yes, but what she had awakened was not just an ancient evil. She had become a conduit. She had become the vessel. The curse wasn't just something that haunted Ashwick. It was something that chose its victims, fed on them, turned them into its servants. "Marla," Elise's voice trembled as she shook her head, unwilling to believe what was happening. "Please, you have to come back to me. You're still in there. I know you are." But Marla only laughed, the sound dark and hollow, devoid of the warmth Elise had once known. "You don't understand, Elise. I am beyond that. There is no coming back. Ashwick owns us now." The walls of the cavern seemed to close in, the very stone around them vibrating, echoing with the malevolent presence of the curse. Elise could feel it. It was inside her, pulling at her heartstrings, feeding on her pain and fear. It had chosen her. She had opened the door, and now the entity, Ashwick, would not let her go. "No," Elise said, her voice shaking with the realization of the depth of what had happened. "I will not let it take me. Not again." Her eyes shifted back to the key, still burning faintly in her hand, the only thing she had left to fight with. The light from it flickered, not with the same intensity it had when she first held it, but with a steady, insistent pulse that seemed to echo in the cavern. "I won't be your vessel," Elise said, her voice growing stronger, filled with a fierce resolve. "I will end this. I will stop the curse." Marla's figure flickered, her form wavering in the dim light as the curse wrapped tighter around her. "You think you can stop it, Elise? You think you can control me? Control Ashwick?" "Yes," Elise said firmly, stepping forward, her heart racing, but her resolve stronger than the fear that gripped her. "I will end it. I will break the cycle." The key surged with light in her hand, and the cavern trembled again, the ground beneath her feet cracking. Marla's twisted form flickered in the shadows, but now it was weaker, fading, as though the power Elise was drawing upon was forcing it back. "No!" Marla screamed, her voice twisted with fury and fear. "You cannot undo what has been done!" Elise took a step forward, her gaze never leaving her sister's form, now nothing more than a shadow of the person she once loved. "It ends here. It ends now." She raised the key high, its power surging through her, illuminating the cavern in a blinding light. The ground trembled again, the walls shuddering as the power of the curse collided with the force of her will. Elise felt herself falling into the light, her body weightless as everything around her dissolved into nothingness. And then, as the blinding light reached its peak, Elise felt a shift. The weight of the curse lifted, the darkness receded. For the first time since stepping into Ashwick, she felt the chains break. The fog, the whispers, the shadows, they were gone. But as the light faded and she opened her eyes, she saw the true cost of her choice. The town was no longer a town. The ruins, the fog, the curse, they had vanished. Ashwick was gone. and so was Marla. The world was quiet, too quiet. Elise opened her eyes, feeling disoriented, as though she had been pulled from one place to another, torn from the very fabric of reality. The light that had flooded the cavern was now gone, leaving only the faintest glow from the key still clutched tightly in her hand. It pulsed weakly, its light flickering in time with her racing heartbeat. The cavern was gone. The fog, the whispers, Marla's twisted form, they had all dissolved into nothingness. But there was something different about the air now. It was heavier, suffocating, as if the world had shifted too far in the other direction. Elise blinked, trying to make sense of her surroundings. The stone floor beneath her feet was still damp with the chill of the cavern, but the walls were gone, replaced by endless emptiness. She was no longer standing in the heart of Ashwick's curse. She was alone, utterly alone, in a place she couldn't quite define. There were no trees, no ruins, no fog, just a vast, endless void stretching in every direction. Her head ached, a deep, throbbing pain that seemed to originate from the very core of her being. She clutched her chest, gasping for breath as the weight of everything that had happened, the curse, the town, the memories of Marla, crashed down on her like a tidal wave. The realization hit her in a wave of nausea. Ashwick was gone. It had been erased, consumed by the very curse it had harbored for centuries. And now, so much of it had been tied to her. Her sister's death, the curse's awakening. She had broken the seal, destroyed the town. But had she done it at the cost of her own soul? Had I really ended it? Or did I only make it worse? Elise could still feel the echoes of the curse, like an invisible thread pulling at her consciousness, trying to reel her back into its grip. She staggered forward, her legs unsteady, her mind reeling. The key burned in her palm again, its heat rising. But there was no sign of the entity, no sign of Marla. For a moment, Elise thought she had succeeded. Perhaps she had ended the cycle. But as the emptiness stretched around her, a deeper, darker truth began to settle over her. The silence was unbearable, and then, like a sharp crack in the stillness, something began to shift. Elise's breath caught in her throat as she turned sharply. At first it was nothing, just the softest hint of movement in the distance. But then the shadows began to stretch, growing longer, deeper, as if they were alive. The air shifted, swirling with a sound that wasn't quite a whisper but a hum, a vibration deep in her bones. Elise. The voice was distant, but it was unmistakable. Marla. Elise froze, the hair on the back of her neck rising in response. Her pulse quickened and her heart began to pound in her chest as the voice echoed through the endless void. It was not the hollow, twisted version of her sister that had spoken before. This time it was soft, familiar, but it was distorted like a dream half remembered. Elise. It came again, and Elise couldn't help herself. She moved forward, her feet moving on their own, drawn to the voice, to the memory of her sister. She wasn't sure why. She wasn't sure if it was real. But she couldn't stop herself. The world around her seemed to shimmer, rippling like water disturbed by a stone. The darkness stretched and folded, and in the distance she saw a shape standing in the shadows. It was small at first, indistinct, but as Elise drew closer, it became clearer. A figure, familiar. Marla. But something was wrong. The figure was wrong. There was no light around it, just the endless stretch of darkness. And as Elise got closer, she could see it more clearly. The figure was still, unmoving, like a silhouette against a stormy sky. Her sister's face, pale, hollowed. It was her, but it wasn't. Marla stood there, the same eyes Elise had once known, but they were empty now, hollow. Her lips were parted, but no words came out. The darkness seemed to swallow her whole, her form flickering in and out of reality, like she wasn't entirely there, like she was a reflection, half-formed. Elise. The voice echoed again, softer now, as though the figure was fading with each breath she took. The figure began to flicker, shifting in the void, distorting into shapes that were not quite human. But Elise couldn't stop herself from reaching out. She had to know if this was real. She had to know if her sister was truly gone. Marla, Elise whispered, her voice trembling. Is it really you? The figure in front of her seemed to hesitate, wavering in and out of existence, like it was caught between worlds. For a moment, Elise thought it would vanish altogether. But then, the figure took a step forward, its form becoming clearer. It was her sister's face, but not. The emptiness in Marla's eyes sent a chill down Elise's spine. This wasn't the sister she had loved. This was something that had been twisted and broken by the curse. You opened the door, Marla said, her voice faint but clear. And now I am free. Elise's heart clenched in her chest. No, she whispered, shaking her head. You're not free, you're still lost. The figure stepped closer, its form growing more solid with every step, until it was standing right before her, just an arm's length away. But the closer Elise came to it, the more she could see the cracks in her sister's form, the flaws. Marla's mouth stretched too wide, her skin too tight, like something made of clay that was starting to crack apart. Elise, the figure repeated, and its voice became louder, more distorted. You freed me. You freed all of us. The ground beneath Elise's feet cracked, the sound sharp and sudden, sending a jolt of panic through her. The darkness was closing in on her. The world around her was shifting, flickering like a broken mirror. The key in her hand burned with a fierce heat again, almost too hot to hold. She could feel the pulse of the curse within it, its hunger, its demand. You're still part of it, Elise whispered, her voice trembling. I can't save. You! I can't save anyone! Marla's figure flickered again, this time faster, more violently, until it was a blur of shadow. Elise's body trembled as the void seemed to close in around her, the world warping, pulling her in. You cannot escape Elise, the figure said, and with those words, it cracked open like a shattered mirror, splitting into countless shards of darkness. Each shard reflected a piece of Elise's past, her memories of Ashwick, of Marla, each one broken, shattered. The darkness pulled at her like 1,000 hands, pulling her deeper into itself. The key pulsed with blinding light, and then everything went still. For a long moment, Elise felt nothing but a deafening, suffocating silence. Her senses felt warped, as though time had stopped altogether. The key, now glowing with an intense, blinding light, seemed to pulse in her hand, its power humming like a living thing. She could hear the faintest echoes of Marla's voice in the distance, but they were too far away, lost in the endless dark that surrounded her. The figure that had once been her sister, twisted, distorted by the curse, was now gone. And yet, the feeling of its presence lingered, hanging in the air like a weight too heavy to bear. The ground beneath her feet began to crack open once again, sending tremors through her body. The darkness shifted and writhed, as though it had a life of its own, pulling and stretching like an endless void. Elise stumbled backward, her legs weak, her head spinning. The walls, once solid and unmoving, began to blur, distorting into shapes. That made no sense. The shadows were closing in on her, and she realized with sudden horror that the key, the very thing she had used to fight back, was now pulling her deeper into the heart of the curse. Elise. The voice came again, but this time it wasn't distant. It was right behind her. Elise spun around, her breath catching in her throat, and there, standing in the midst of the swirling darkness, was a figure, tall and imposing, its features shrouded in shadows. It wasn't Marla this time. It wasn't anything human at all. The figure was something older, something far darker than anything she had ever encountered. It had no face, just a mass of shifting shadows that moved as if they were alive. Tendrils of darkness that reached out and recoiled with each breath. The air around it seemed to thrum with an otherworldly energy, vibrating with a power that seemed to defy comprehension. "Elisa," the voice spoke again, now more of a growl than a whisper. "You cannot break what was never meant to be broken." The figure stepped forward, its form shifting and twisting, its presence overwhelming. Elise felt the key in her hand tremble, the light flickering wildly, its power now a beacon that was both painful and comforting all at once. The ground cracked beneath her feet, and she could feel the stone trembling as though something ancient was stirring beneath her. "No," Elise whispered, her voice shaking. "I won't let you." The figure raised a shadowed hand toward her, and Elise could feel the air around her tighten, squeezing the very breath from her lungs. She could sense its power, its dominance over the space, and for a moment she felt utterly helpless. The darkness was pulling at her, wrapping itself around her, suffocating her with every passing second. But then, a surge of clarity hit her. She couldn't give in, not now, not after everything she had fought for, everything she had endured. The key was still in her hand. It was still a part of her. And with that realization, Elise's pulse steadied, her mind sharpening, focused on the only thing that mattered. She raised the key high above her head, its light flashing with a brilliance that cut through the darkness. The figure recoiled, its form flickering in response, as if the light itself was a poison it could not bear. The shadows trembled, shrinking back, and for the first time Elise felt a surge of power that wasn't the curse, it was her own. "You cannot control me anymore," Elise said, her voice firm, her grip tightening on the key. "I am the one who chooses now." With every ounce of strength she could summon, Elise slammed the key into the ground in front of her. The impact sent a shockwave of light through the cavern, the very air shuddering as the cavern walls cracked open. The sound was deafening, like the earth itself was being torn apart. The key's light exploded outward, illuminating everything, casting long shadows as the figure writhed in pain. The entity's form was no longer solid. It flickered, distorted, as if it were being torn apart by the sheer force of the key's power. Elise could feel it in her chest, the weight of the curse, its presence beginning to break apart, its control over her, over Ashwick, slipping away. The cavern shuddered, the walls cracking, as the void that had swallowed everything started to collapse in on itself. "No!" the figure screamed, its voice now a garbled roar of fury and frustration. "You are nothing. You are just a child. A vessel for the darkness. You cannot defeat what has been born into this world." But Elise wasn't listening. She was no longer the broken girl who had stumbled into Ashwick, desperate to understand the mystery. She was no longer the one searching for answers, for a way to undo the wrongs of the past. She was the one who had chosen. She was the one who had opened the door, and now she was the one who would close it. With a final, decisive thrust, Elise slammed the key deeper into the earth, and the light exploded once more. The very ground beneath her feet trembled violently, splitting apart in jagged lines that seemed to reach down into the deepest, darkest parts of the world. The cavern shook with the fury of the curse being destroyed, collapsing inward like a dying star. And as the last of the shadows were ripped from the walls, the entity screamed, its form disintegrating into a cloud of black mist, its voice fading into nothing. And then, silence. The cavern was still, the tremors subsiding as the last remnants of the curse were wiped from the world. Elise stood alone, her body shaking, her mind racing. The key in her hand had stopped glowing, its light now nothing more than a faint ember, no longer a beacon of power, but a silent relic. The darkness had been undone, the seal had been broken, but as the light dimmed, Elise realized something had changed. The world around her was no longer the same. The void that had swallowed Ashwick, the place she had once known, was gone. The town had been wiped away, erased from existence, as if it had never been. Elise stood alone in the remnants of what had once been Ashwick, what had once been her life, and she felt the weight of it all press down on her. The key, the curse, Marla, they were all gone. But in their absence, she knew she had paid a terrible price. She had sacrificed everything. She had broken the seal. And now, there was nothing left. The silence that followed the eruption of light felt like a void, one that stretched endlessly in every direction, swallowing everything in its wake. Elise stood motionless in the middle of what was once a cavern, now reduced to nothing but fragments, jagged edges of stone that disappeared into the dark expanse around her. The key, still clasped tightly in her hand, had dimmed, its once blinding light now reduced to a soft, almost imperceptible glow. The air was still, the vibrations of the curse's destruction echoing like fading aftershocks. The pressure that had been building within her, the weight of the dark force that had consumed Ashwick, had disappeared. But instead of relief, Elise felt an unnerving emptiness. The entity was gone, the curse shattered, but something had been lost. Something deep within her had broken as well, and she couldn't tell if it had been the town or herself. Her heart still hammered in her chest, each beat louder than the last, as if trying to fill the space that now felt so empty, so hollow. She glanced around, but the world around her was nothing like the Ashwick she had known. The fog, the ruins, the oppressive shadow, they were gone. What remained was a strange, quiet landscape that seemed to stretch into infinity. No buildings, no trees, no landmarks, just an endless expanse of blackened earth and shifting light. Elise, the voice again. It was faint at first, like a distant memory calling her name from across an impossible distance. She froze, her breath catching in her throat. It wasn't the same as before, it was softer, gentler, almost like it was coming from inside her own mind, but still it was there, her sister's voice. "Elise, can you hear me?" For the first time since she had destroyed the curse, Elise's knees buckled, and she collapsed onto the ground. Her fingers dug into the dirt beneath her, as if trying to anchor herself to something, anything. Her mind reeled, still disoriented, by the destruction she had just witnessed. The thought of Marla, real Marla, calling her from within this abyss felt like a cruel joke. She couldn't be gone. She couldn't. Elise hadn't finished what she set out to do. She couldn't have. "Elise!" The voice was clearer now, almost right beside her. It was undeniable. Elise's breath hitched. She felt it, Marla, reaching for her. But this time, it wasn't the voice of the curse, distorted and hollow. It was her sister. It was Marla. Elise. Trembling, Elise pushed herself up from the ground, wiping away the dirt and debris that clung to her skin. She turned slowly, scanning the horizon, her heart beating faster now, her entire body bracing for what came next. Her eyes darted around, but there was nothing, just the void, stretching on forever. The silence suffocated her once more. "Elise, I'm here." And then, from the mist that had begun to creep up at the edges of the blackened earth, she saw it, a figure, a person emerging from the fog. It was indistinct at first, blurry, but as the figure approached, Elise could see it clearly. Marla. It was her, no longer a twisted reflection of the curse, but real, alive. Elise. Her sister's voice was so close now, a sound Elise thought she would never hear again. And yet, there she stood, eyes wide, tears shining in her gaze, her, skin pale but unmistakably her. The weight in Elise's chest lifted for a brief, fleeting moment as she watched the girl she thought lost forever walk toward her. "Marla?" Elise gasped, taking a step forward. Her voice broke as it passed her lips, and she felt a sudden weight in her throat, as though the very name she had called her sister for so long was impossible to speak. She wanted to run to her, to collapse into her arms and feel the warmth she had missed so much. She had fought through hell to bring her back. She had ended the curse for this moment, for her. But the closer she got, the more wrong everything felt. Her sister's eyes, wide and shining, seemed vacant, devoid of warmth, and as Marla stepped toward her, her feet did not touch the earth. She drifted forward as if floating in air, leaving no trace in the dirt. The ground beneath her seemed to tremble with each step, as though it were resisting her presence. Marla stopped when they were only a few feet apart, her pale, hollow eyes locking with Elise's, and she spoke again. "You did it, Elise. You freed me." Her voice, once tender and familiar, was now laced with something darker, something distorted. "You broke the seal. You ended the curse. But you didn't save me." Elise's heart lurched in her chest, the joy of seeing her sister again, fading like smoke in the wind. Something was wrong. Something wasn't right. This wasn't Marla, not fully. Her sister's form flickered again, her skin shimmering, as though her very body was flickering in and out of existence. "No, no," Elise whispered, her hands trembling as she reached out, her voice hoarse. "Marla, you're here. You're real." But with each word, the space between them seemed to grow, until Elise couldn't bridge it. Her outstretched hand froze mid-air. "Am I?" Marla whispered, her smile crooked. The laugh that followed was hollow and eerie, like the wind itself had taken form. "You never understood, Elise. I've never been real. I've always been a part of the curse, Ashwick's soul. And now, so are you." Elise stumbled backward, her heart thundering in her chest as the realization struck. Marla's form warped, distorting into shapes Elise could barely comprehend, her features flickering from one thing to another. The figure before her was a reflection of Ashwick's curse, just as Marla had become one with it when Elise had first arrived in the town. And now, Elise had too. The town's ghost had not been exorcised. It had simply moved into her. "No," Elise whispered, her voice breaking. "No, I won't be part of it. I won't." Marla's form continued to stretch and twist, like it was being bent by an invisible force, something not of this world. The ground underfoot began to crack, and Elise could feel herself being pulled toward the center of it all, the very heart of the curse, the town, the void. "You've always been mine, Elise," Marla's distorted voice called from the shifting mist. "The curse doesn't release, it binds, and you are a part of it." The key in Elise's hand burned hot, a searing heat that shot up her arm and into her chest. She felt the presence of the curse, overwhelming her, pressing down on her mind, and she fell to her knees. But deep inside her, the faintest spark of resistance lingered, the one thing she still had. Elise. The voice, now dark and guttural, rose from the shadows around her. "You are the chosen. You were always meant to open the door. And now, you will stay here forever." With everything in her, Elise clenched her teeth, forcing her will through the pain, the fear, the curse itself. The key burned so fiercely now that it was nearly unbearable, but she pushed it down into the earth, into the very heart of Ashwick's lingering power. And then the ground cracked open. A rift, dark and swirling, split the air around her, and the curse screamed, the void swallowing everything. Elise. The darkness swallowed Elise whole. She felt herself fall, her body weightless, tumbling into an abyss that had no end, no direction. The rift she had created by driving the key into the earth expanded beneath her, tearing through the very fabric of the world. The sounds of the cursed entity's screams, echoes of Ashwick's haunted past, filled the air like a symphony of terror, as if the town itself was unraveling, brick by brick, stone by stone. Elise's breath caught in her throat as the pressure of the void pressed down on her, suffocating her thoughts. Time seemed to lose all meaning as she fell, the endless fall stretching on for what felt like an eternity. The feeling of emptiness, of being lost in a world that no longer existed, tugged at her core. Every fiber of her being screamed in protest, but there was nothing she could do to stop it. The rift was the town's wound, and she was caught in its death throes. Elise! The voice came again, soft and distant at first, like a fading memory, but this time it was unmistakable. It was Marla, or the reflection of Marla, the twisted echo of what had once been her sister. Elise tried to push it away, to silence the haunting call that threatened to consume her, but it only grew louder, more insistent. Elise. The air around her thickened, and the sound of her name, so full of pain and yearning, reverberated in her ears like a tidal wave crashing over her, drawing her deeper into the void. She tried to scream, to fight, but the weight of the rift, the curse's influence, was too powerful. Her body felt numb, as though she were being pulled apart from the inside. And then suddenly there was light. It wasn't the light of the key, not the blinding radiance that had once been her salvation. This light was something different, dim and fragile, like the faintest glow on the horizon of a dying world. Elise's eyes fluttered open, and for the first time in what felt like forever, she saw something besides the emptiness. The dark, endless abyss had shifted, revealing a space between worlds, a liminal place that existed outside the boundaries of Ashwick. Her breath caught in her throat. She was no longer falling. Her body hovered, suspended in the air, and as her eyes adjusted to the faint light, she saw the shape of the land, a landscape so alien, so disconnected from the world she knew. It was vast and barren, devoid of color, stretching into an endless expanse of gray. A world that had been abandoned, forgotten by time. And standing at the edge of this desolate world was a figure. It was Marla, or at least the form that had once been her. But she was not the sister Elise had known. Marla stood there, her face expressionless, her body thin and fragile, her skin drawn tight over her bones. Her eyes were empty, hollow voids, like two black pits that seemed to stare into Elise's soul. She was not alive. She was a reflection, a remnant of the curse that had been the heart of Ashwick. She was a mirror, reflecting all that Ashwick had stolen, all that Elise had sacrificed. Elise. Marla's voice was soft, almost tender, but there was something cold and empty in the way it echoed through the void. You've done it. You've destroyed the town. You've ended the curse. Elise's chest tightened as she fought to speak, her voice hoarse, barely audible. I thought I was saving you. I thought I could fix it. Marla's lips curled into a twisted smile, the kind of smile that had once been familiar, once been a source of comfort. But now it was a mockery. Fix it? You never understood, Elise. The curse was never something you could fix. It was a part of you. It was a part of me, a part of Ashwick. Elise took a step forward, but the ground beneath her feet felt unstable. as if the very fabric of this place were beginning to tear. The light around her flickered, and she felt the pull of the void again, threatening to drag her back into the rift. "No," Elise whispered, her voice growing stronger, more determined. "I won't let you take me. I won't let this thing have control over me anymore." Marla's form flickered, her body shifting as if it were made of shadows, slowly unraveling in the light. "You can't escape, Elise. You were always meant to be part of Ashwick. You opened the door, and now you belong to it, just like I did." "No!" Elise cried out, her voice trembling with both fear and defiance. "I chose this. I chose to fight, to end it. You are not part of me. You are not part of Ashwick anymore." The moment the words left her mouth, the landscape around them shifted again. The grey expanse seemed to ripple, the void stretching and distorting like a reflection in broken glass. The pressure in the air grew unbearable, and Elise could feel the walls of reality beginning to crack. "You are wrong, Elise." Marla's voice echoed once more, now distorted, like the wind scraping across a barren field. "There is no end. There is no escape from this. You cannot break what was always meant to be." The last remnants of the world around them began to collapse, folding in on itself. The landscape cracked apart like glass shattering, the echoes of Ashwick's curse bleeding into the very air. Elise gasped as the force of it hit her, the pressure of the rift pushing down on her chest, threatening to crush her. But in that moment, something within her sparked. She couldn't give in. She couldn't let the curse, Marla, drag her back. She had already lost everything, but she had not lost herself. With a cry, Elise raised the key once more, and in that instant, the cavern of her mind, of her memories, began to collapse. The key pulsed with a fierce light, a blinding radiance that shattered the rift, tearing through the very fabric of the void itself. The light spread outward, unraveling the curse piece by piece, and the darkness began to recede. "No!" Marla's voice echoed in fury, but it was already too late. The light from the key expanded, flooding the void, drowning out the last remnants of the curse, until there was nothing left but a vast, infinite emptiness. Elise felt herself being pulled away from the void, from the rift, and for the first time in what felt like eternity, she felt free. But freedom came with a cost. When the light finally faded, Elise found herself standing alone, the landscape now completely still. The key in her hand had stopped pulsing, its light dimmed, leaving only the faintest glow. She had ended it. She had broken the curse. But in the process, Ashwick was gone. Her sister was gone. The town, the memories, everything had been erased. All that was left was the echo of her choice and the question that haunted her: was it worth it? Elise stood in the aftermath of it all, the weight of her actions pressing heavily upon her chest. The silence in the void around her felt suffocating, almost oppressive, as though the world had collapsed inward, leaving only her and the remnants of what had been. The key in her hand had lost its light, its power waning like a dying ember. The ground beneath her feet was still, unmoving, and yet it felt like it was vibrating with something she couldn't quite grasp. Something that had shifted at a deeper, more fundamental level. Ashwick, her home, her curse, was gone. The fog that had once choked the streets, the creaking buildings, the echo of whispers, all had disappeared into the nothingness. The very fabric of the town had been undone, erased as though it had never existed. And yet, despite the finality of it, something remained. Something not fully done, not fully resolved. Elise could feel it deep within her bones. It was a sensation so deep, so rooted that she couldn't ignore it. The key, though dim, still thrummed with the faintest pulse. The air around her seemed to shift ever so slightly, as though the atmosphere itself was holding its breath, waiting for something. She didn't know what to do next. There was no town to return to, no sister to rescue, no curse to undo. For the first time in her life, she was truly, utterly alone. Elise. Her heart skipped a beat, and her breath caught in her throat. The voice. It was faint at first, a whisper carried by the wind but unmistakably familiar. It was her name, her sister's voice. A distant call that echoed through the silence. Marla? Elise's voice trembled as she called out, but there was no answer. Only the faint rustle of the wind around her, the pulse of the key in her hand. Elise stood there, her eyes searching the vast, empty expanse. The world around her had taken on a surreal quality, like a dream slipping through her fingers. Her heart was still raw, battered by everything she had endured, everything she had sacrificed. The visions of Ashwick, of Marla, her sister's tortured face flickered in her mind like ghosts, refusing to let her rest. The silence stretched on as the weight of her choice began to settle within her. She had ended the curse, destroyed the entity, torn apart the very foundation of the town. But what had she truly done? What had she really won? Was this freedom, or was it just another layer of the same torment? Elise, the voice came again, clearer now, more distinct. She turned, feeling the call reverberate through her entire being, but when she looked, there was no one. The figure, the shadow, was gone. Elise's heart sank as her mind began to spin, the sharp sting of loss returning with a vengeance. Was it the last echo of Marla's voice, or was it something else? Something worse. Something waiting in the wings, preparing to pull her back into the depths of the nightmare she had just escaped. Her thoughts raced. She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. But there was something rising in the air around her. The light, no longer the dim glow from the key, but an unfamiliar, flickering light, began to grow, spreading out across the vast, empty space. Elise could feel it, a pulsing energy that seemed to hum with life, like the heart of the town itself had returned to beat once more. No, she whispered to herself, shaking her head as a new wave of dread washed over her. Not again. The ground shifted beneath her feet. The space around her began to distort, the edges blurring, twisting, as the faint light grew brighter, sharper. The air around her crackled, alive with electricity, the very atmosphere feeling thick with tension, like something ancient and powerful was awakening. Elise, the voice again. But this time, it wasn't just Marla. It wasn't just a call. It was a command. The voice was different, distorted, as though it had been twisted by something malevolent, something far older than anything she could have imagined. No. Elise's breath caught in her throat, her chest tightening with panic. She could feel it now, deep in her soul. The entity, the curse. It wasn't gone. It had only been waiting for this very moment, the moment when Elise had destroyed the town, broken the cycle, thinking that she had freed herself. But she hadn't freed herself. Not really. The ground beneath her feet rumbled, a deep, guttural sound that reverberated through her body. The dark void began to change shape, folding into something new, something familiar, and at the center of it all, a shape began to emerge. A figure, one that Elise had hoped she would never see again. There it was, standing in the center of the shifting void, the figure that had tormented her every step, the entity that had haunted Ashwick for centuries. It was darker than she remembered, a mass of shadows, of endless void. Its face, if it could be called a face, was a jagged distortion of shapes and shadows, its eyes hollow and endless. Its mouth was wide, too wide, filled with rows of sharp teeth stretching from ear to ear. Elise, the voice came again, but now it wasn't Marla's. It wasn't even the voice of the town. It was the entity itself. You cannot escape me. You can never escape me. Elise's body stiffened as the creature took a step toward her, its form shifting with unnatural speed. The shadows that formed its body were alive, writhing and undulating, like a living thing. The very air around it seemed to darken, absorbing the light, suffocating the space around her. No. Elise screamed, raising the key once more, the faint glow still emanating from its surface. I've destroyed you. I've broken the curse. The entity let out a hollow laugh, its form expanding, stretching outward as though it were mocking her. You think you have destroyed me? You can't destroy what was never born. I am the root, Elise, the foundation. You were always meant to free me. No. Elise's voice broke as the weight of the truth began to settle on her shoulders. The realization struck her like a slap in the face. Ashwick had never truly been free, not even in its death. It had always been connected to her. It had always been a part of her, just as the entity was. The curse was not a thing of the past. It was alive, a reflection of the very darkness inside her. You can't escape what you are, Elise, the entity said, its voice now low and guttural, filled with triumph. The curse has always been you. With a final surge of energy, the entity lunged toward her, its shadowy form wrapping around her like chains, pulling her into its endless void. Part 20. The awakening ended. Elise's chest tightened as the darkness coiled around her, tightening like a vice, suffocating her. The weight of the entity, its presence pressing in on her like a storm, was unbearable. She gasped for air, her body trembling with the overwhelming force of it. The key in her hand flickered weakly, its light now dim and flickering like the last embers of a dying fire. The entity, its form ever shifting, wrapped itself around her like a cloud of suffocating smoke, its cold whispers flooding, her mind drowning her thoughts. She could feel the deep, ancient power of it coursing through the void, its grip tightening around her soul. The ground beneath her feet had dissolved, and the world had become nothing but a swirling abyss of shadow, darkness, and him. The entity, the thing she had hoped she had destroyed, had only been lying dormant, waiting for this moment, waiting for her to open the door, for her to break the seal, for her to set it free, and now it was coming for her. You can't escape, Elise, the entity whispered in a voice that felt like it was crawling through her bones, filling her with ice. You opened the door, and now you belong to me. Her legs felt weak, her body trembling. But through the chaos of it all, one thought remained clear in her mind. She had to fight. The key she had used to break the seal, to end the curse, still burned with the faintest trace of light. It was not the radiant glow of before, but it was enough. Enough to give her a shred of hope, a spark of defiance that refused to go out. With everything she had left, Elise gripped the key tightly, her knuckles white, and thrust it forward. I am not yours, she whispered through clenched teeth, her voice raw, the words barely making it past the lump in her throat. I never was. The moment the key touched the air in front of her, the void around her shook. The dark mist, the shadows, the very fabric of this nightmare seemed to recoil from the light, their form warping, flickering as though they couldn't bear to be in its presence. Elise's heart pounded as the key pulsed with a surge of energy, its power growing stronger with each second, the air crackling with it. The entity hissed, its voice cracking with fury as it seemed to twist in the air before her. You think you can fight me? You think you can defy me? But Elise, with every ounce of strength she could muster, stood tall, the key glowing fiercely between her hands. "I'm not the same as before," she said, her voice rising with newfound confidence. "You are not my fate. I choose my own destiny." And with that, she thrust the key forward, harder, faster. The light from the key erupted in a flash of brilliance, blinding and all-consuming, as the shadows and the void around her screamed in agony. Elise felt the sharp pain of the energy coursing through her, burning her skin, her very soul. But she did not let go. She held on tighter, pressing the key deeper into the darkness, refusing to let it take her again. The light became overwhelming, flooding the abyss with such intensity that Elise had to close her eyes. But even then she could feel it, the pulse of something dying. The entity's screams became ragged, disjointed, and then, suddenly, silent. The light surged, more powerful than it had ever been, and Elise felt herself thrown backward as though the very force of the key had flung her out of the void. The ground beneath her shifted again, and she found herself gasping for air, coughing, as though she had just emerged from deep water. Her eyes opened slowly, her vision blurry as the last traces of darkness began to fade. The key's light had finally died down, leaving only the faintest trace of its power behind. Elise felt the weight in her chest loosen, and with it, the oppressive presence of the curse. She was free. But as the final echoes of the darkness slipped away, a quiet realization began to settle over her. The world had shifted. What she had done, what she had chosen to do, had broken more than just the curse. It had altered something fundamental. The town was gone. Ashwick was erased, and with it the memories of those who had been trapped within its grasp. But that was not the only thing Elise had sacrificed. She looked around, her breath ragged. What was left? What remained of her journey? And then, just as she thought she might collapse under the weight of the truth, something stirred in the distance. A light, soft and glowing like the first glimmer of dawn breaking over a horizon. Elise took a step forward, her body still aching from the battle, but she was drawn to it. She had come so far, she had fought so hard, and now, in the quiet after the storm, something called her. Was it the past? The future? She didn't know. But she knew that she could not stay here, in this hollow place where the remnants of Ashwick lingered. There was no going back, no undoing what had been done. But there was one thing she still had left. One thing that couldn't be taken away. Her choice. The light before her grew brighter, and she stepped forward, drawn toward it, toward whatever awaited her beyond the silence. The key had done its part. The curse was no longer her burden. She was no longer the same person who had first entered Ashwick, broken and searching for answers. Elise was a new creation, one forged through fire, through loss, through everything that had led her here. She had broken the cycle. She had broken the seal. The light embraced her, and she stepped into it, her heart steady, her mind clear. The curse was no more. But as she passed through the threshold, she knew that freedom always comes with a price, and now it was time to face what came after. Elise stepped forward into the light, feeling the warmth of it against her skin, the weight of everything she had experienced pressing down on her. The void that had surrounded her began to dissipate, replaced by a soft glow like the first rays of dawn breaking over a world that had long been shrouded in darkness. For a moment, everything felt still, peaceful, almost serene, like she had finally arrived at some long-awaited destination. The world around her was soft, muted, and somehow familiar. She couldn't place it at first, but there was something in the air, a feeling she hadn't had in what seemed like a lifetime, a sense of home. Her heart, which had been so heavy for so long, began to slow. The rushing thoughts, the fears, the regrets, everything seemed to calm, dissipating like fog in the morning light. The pain that had been with her, the fear of losing herself to the curse, was finally lifting. But as she moved forward, stepping deeper into the soft, glowing light, she realized the world around her was shifting. The path beneath her feet began to take shape, revealing the faint outline of a road, an ancient, worn path that seemed to stretch endlessly ahead of her. The ground was covered in moss and leaves, old and faded, as though it had been forgotten by time. The trees lining the path were tall and twisted, their branches stretching toward the sky like gnarled hands, casting long, crooked shadows on the ground. The air was heavy with the scent of earth and something else, something ancient, like the memory of a forgotten time. The landscape around her was beautiful, in its own strange way, but it was also unsettling. The quiet, the stillness, seemed to hum with a quiet tension, as though something was hidden just beyond the reach of her perception, something waiting. Elise hesitated, her heart suddenly heavy again as she looked down the path. There was no turning back, no other direction to go. She had crossed the threshold. She had destroyed Ashwick, shattered the curse, and set herself free. Or so she thought. But there was something here, something lingering, something that felt like an unspoken promise. She didn't know what awaited her, but she could sense it deep in her chest, the pull of something that had been lost, something that had always been a part of her, but that she had never understood. Taking a deep breath, Elise began to walk down the path, her footsteps soft on the mossy ground. Each step felt like she was moving deeper into a dream, into a memory she could not quite recall. The trees towered overhead, their branches swaying slightly in the wind, and the air was thick with the scent of damp earth and growing things. The path seemed to stretch forever, but as she walked, she began to feel a strange sense of connection, a bond to the place, to the land beneath her feet. As she moved forward, she started to see things, faint shapes in the distance, flickering at the edge of her vision, like shadows in the corners of a room. Faces, or something like them, drifting, just out of reach. They were vague, shifting like reflections in a broken mirror, never fully taking form. Elise. Her name, softly spoken, echoed through the trees. She stopped in her tracks, the hairs on the back of her neck standing up. The voice, soft and familiar, was unmistakable. But it wasn't just a voice. It was the memory of the voice, the echo of everything she had lost. Marla. It was her sister's voice, but it wasn't right. It didn't sound like the Marla she had known. Elise. The voice came again, closer now. Elise's heart beat faster as she spun around, her pulse quickening. She searched the trees, the shadows, but there was no one. Only the path stretching ahead, endless, winding into the unknown. But then, from somewhere deeper within the forest, she saw it, a figure, a shape standing just beyond the reach of the trees. It was faint at first, like a mirage. But as Elise's eyes locked onto it, the figure began to take shape. A woman, standing tall, cloaked in shadow. Her face was obscured, but there was something about her, something that called out to Elise. Elise. The figure moved forward, her silhouette clearer with every step, and Elise could feel her breath catch in her throat. Her heart raced with a mix of dread and longing. Marla. Was it really her? The figure stepped into the light, and as it did, Elise's pulse skipped. It was her, but not in the way she expected. The woman before her was pale, her skin almost translucent, as if she were made of mist. Her face was a mask of hollow eyes and a faint, sad smile. But it wasn't Marla's smile. It was something else, something broken. Elise's legs trembled as the woman approached. "You've come so far, Elise," the figure whispered, her voice tinged with sorrow. "You've broken the curse. You've ended Ashwick. But there is still one thing left to do." Elise took a step back, her hand tightening around the key that still burned in her palm. "What is this? What is happening?" she asked, her voice quivering. "Who are you?" The figure tilted her head, her eyes vacant, yet full of an impossible sadness. "I am not who you think I am. I am not the Marla you remember. I am a reflection of everything that was lost, a shadow of what could have been." Elise shook her head, confused, the ground beneath her seeming to tilt as the world shifted once again. "I don't understand." "What do you mean?" "What's left?" The Aochim figure reached out, her hand hovering in the air like it could touch Elise's soul. "There was always a price, Elise. Always a debt. The curse you broke was never just a curse. It was a cycle that had to be completed. And now," the figure's voice dropped to a soft, haunting whisper, "now you must choose." Elise's breath caught in her throat. "Choose what?" The woman smiled, a sad, knowing smile that sent a chill through Elise's bones. "The price of freedom is not without sacrifice. You cannot leave the past behind, not truly. You cannot undo what has been done. You can only move forward. But at what cost?" Elise could feel the weight of her words pressing down on her, suffocating her. The trees around her seemed to close in, the path growing narrower with each passing second. The choices, the sacrifices, were all catching up to her. She could feel it in her chest. The past, the curse, had left its mark on her, and no matter how far she ran, it would never truly let her go. And then, in the distance, she saw it. A door. A doorway, standing alone in the middle of the path. It was a shadow, a flickering reflection of light and darkness. But there was something in it, something calling her forward. "Elise," the figure whispered one last time, her voice now barely audible, "the choice is yours." The door stood alone at the end of the path, framed by the twisted branches of the ancient trees, their gnarled limbs reaching out like skeletal hands, clawing at the air. Elise's heart pounded as she stared at it, her breath shallow, her mind racing. The figure, the strange reflection of Marla, had faded into the shadows, leaving only the distant echo of her voice to linger. The doorway was like a beacon in the mist, an invitation that both terrified and mesmerized her. It wasn't just a door, it was a threshold, a boundary between what was, what could have been, and what was yet to come. Elise could feel the pull of it, the magnetic force that seemed to draw her in, urging her forward. It was the end of the path she had walked, the culmination of everything she had endured. But what lay beyond? Was it freedom, or was it something worse? She took a hesitant step toward the door, the earth beneath her feet soft and yielding, the ground seeming to shift with every movement she made. The air around her hummed with an energy that sent a shiver down her spine, as though the very fabric of reality was bending in her presence. Elise reached out, her hand trembling slightly as she approached the door. The key, still burning faintly in her palm, thrummed with energy, as if it recognized the significance of this moment. With a deep breath, she placed her hand on the door's surface. The wood was smooth and cold to the touch, its texture unlike anything she had felt before. The door seemed ancient, yet ageless, like it had been waiting for her, waiting for this exact moment. The world around her seemed to stop. The air held its breath, and for the briefest of moments, everything was still, as though time itself was suspended. Then, with a soft creak, the door began to open, the darkness beyond it slowly giving way to a faint, dim light that grew brighter with every inch the door moved. Elise hesitated, the weight of the choice before her pressing on her chest. She could feel the pull, the irresistible force of it, but she didn't know if she was ready to face what lay beyond. The voice of the figure, the reflection, floated back to her. "You cannot escape what you are," it had said. You are the curse. Elise, just as it is you. Elise closed her eyes for a moment, trying to steady her breath. The weight of her journey, the destruction of Ashwick, the ending of the curse, the memories of her sister, pressed heavily upon her. She had sacrificed so much to get to this point. Her sister, the town, her very soul. And now, this was the final step. This was the moment that would define everything. There was no going back. The door was open, and whatever lay beyond it, she had to face it. Taking a step forward, Elise crossed the threshold. The world beyond the door was not what she expected. It wasn't another void, another empty landscape. It wasn't the darkness or the endless mist she had feared. Instead, it was a place of light, soft golden light, like the first rays of the morning sun. The air was warm, and the ground beneath her feet felt solid, familiar, and alive. Around her, tall grasses swayed gently in the breeze, their tips brushing against her legs like a welcome. The air smelled of earth and fresh rain, and somewhere in the distance she could hear the faint sound of birds chirping. It was peaceful, too peaceful. But as Elise stepped farther into this new world, she realized something was off. The light was too bright. The landscape, though serene, felt unnervingly perfect. It was a place that seemed to exist outside of time, a place where nothing ever changed. There were no trees, no markings, no signs of age, only endless fields and gentle hills that stretched into the horizon. And in the distance, there was something else. A figure. Elise's heart skipped as she spotted it, standing on a hill in the distance. It was a woman, her back turned to Elise, her silhouette framed by the bright golden light. She looked familiar, but Elise couldn't place her. She had seen this person before, but where? Elise, the voice whispered, the same voice she had heard calling her name in the void. The voice of Marla, or what was left of her. But this time the voice wasn't distorted. It was soft, gentle, inviting. Elise's chest tightened as she walked toward the figure, her steps slow, measured. The closer she got, the more she realized the figure was not just familiar. It was her. The woman standing on the hill was her, but not. She looked the same, yet different. There was a softness in her face that was gone from Elise's own reflection. A peace she had never known. A calmness that had eluded her all her life. Elise stopped at the base of the hill, her breath caught in her throat. Marla. The figure turned slowly, her eyes filled with warmth, but also with an infinite sadness that seemed to stretch beyond words. No, Elise, I am not Marla, but I am what she left behind. Elise's heart stuttered in her chest. She wanted to speak, but her words caught in her throat, the weight of the figure's presence heavy upon her. She was standing before something she couldn't quite understand. It felt like an answer, like something long awaited, but it was also an illusion. The figure stepped forward, her smile faint but kind, and reached out a hand toward Elise. You have broken the cycle, the figure said softly, but the journey does not end here. You freed yourself from the curse, but now you must face what comes after. What comes after? Elise whispered, her voice trembling. The figure's eyes deepened with sorrow. Freedom is a choice, Elise. A choice with consequences. You cannot undo what has been done. Ashwick is gone. The curse is broken, but you cannot escape the fact that you are changed. She paused, her gaze never leaving Elise's. And neither can I. Elise felt a chill run through her, as though the ground beneath her was shifting once more. This place, this peaceful, golden world, wasn't real. It couldn't be. It was a facade, an illusion crafted from the remnants of the curse. No, Elise whispered, shaking her head. I ended it. I stopped it. I thought I was free. The figure stepped closer, and the warmth of her presence seemed to fade, replaced by an unbearable emptiness. You were never meant to escape, the figure said, her voice now tinged with sorrow. The curse is not just something you destroy. It is something you become. And now, Elise, you must decide what it means to carry that weight. The wind began to pick up around them, rustling the grasses at Elise's feet. The figure's form flickered, like a reflection in broken glass, before vanishing into thin air. Elise. Her name came again, but this time it wasn't just a voice. It was inside her, echoing through her thoughts, like the last, fading breath of the curse itself, and then the light around her flickered and dimmed. The air around Elise thickened, the once gentle breeze now turning sharp and cold as the world around her began to fade. The golden light that had embraced her, the peace she thought she had found, was slipping away, like sand through her fingers. Her heart pounded in her chest as the ground beneath her trembled, the faint hum of energy vibrating through her body. The figure, the strange reflection of Marla, had disappeared, leaving nothing but the silence and the distant whisper of the wind. For a brief, fragile moment, Elise stood alone, uncertain, her mind clouded with the weight of everything that had come before. The journey, the sacrifice, the destruction of Ashwick. She had thought she was free, free of the curse, free of the past, of the darkness that had haunted her. But the truth was clearer now than it had ever been. She had never truly escaped. Not from the curse, not from herself. The ground began to shake more violently, and Elise fell to her knees, the weight of the realization pressing down on her like an invisible force. Her breath came in shallow gasps, as the very landscape around her seemed to shift, twisting and distorting like the fabric of reality itself was unraveling. The world she had once known, the world she had tried to save, was slipping away, vanishing into the void. But there was something more than just loss in the air. It was a presence, something that had been with her all along, something that was now demanding her attention. Elise could feel it, deep in her bones. The pull, the force of the curse still clinging to her, its tendrils winding through her very soul, wrapping her in its grasp once more. She could hear the whispers again, low, distant, like the sound of 1,000 voices calling her name. Elise. The curse, the entity, had never truly left. It had merely waited, lingering in the shadows, preparing for this moment. Elise, the voice, was now unmistakable. Not Marla's, but something more. A voice full of power and ancient hunger. The entity, the darkness that had consumed Ashwick, was here, in this space, speaking to her through the very air. Elise looked up, her eyes searching the horizon, but there was no figure, no form, just the growing emptiness. The silence of this place felt like it was swallowing her whole. "You've come so far, Elise," the voice spoke again, echoing through the vast, endless emptiness. "And now you are at the edge of everything, the edge of your fate, the edge of the final choice." A shiver ran down her spine as the world around her continued to distort, the edges of reality bending, flickering. The land, the trees, the sky, everything seemed to lose its shape, its form, like a dream slipping away. Elise's mind spun as the truth struck her with terrifying clarity. This wasn't just a test of strength, of will. This was the final act. The last choice that would decide not only her future, but the very essence of what she had become. Her hand trembled as she gripped the key, its faint light still pulsing in her palm. The power of the key had guided her this far. It had been the weapon, the means by which she had broken the curse, had undone Ashwick's darkness. But now, It seemed to grow heavier in her hand, its light dimming. It was no longer a tool, it was a symbol of everything she had lost, everything she had sacrificed. And yet, it was also the only thing that remained. Elise's mind raced. The key, the curse, the reflection of Marla, the voices, all of it. She had been chosen. The town had always been a part of her, intertwined with her own fate. The entity's presence, its power, had fed off her, just as Ashwick had fed off its people for generations. It had become a part of her, as much a part of the curse as the town itself. But could she truly rid herself of it? Could she escape the cycle? Could she choose to break the link once and for all? The light in her hand flickered, and in that moment, she realized that this was it. There was no escaping the cost, no way to undo what had been done. The curse had not been a force beyond her control. It had always been a part of her, a part she could not escape. But she could choose. She could choose what she did with it. She could choose who she became. The path ahead of her was unclear. The light at the end of the tunnel, this place, this strange, distorted reality, was not a place of salvation. It was a place of decision. The final threshold. Her last chance to confront the truth of what she had done, of who she was, and what she could become. And then a figure appeared before her. It was Marla, but not as Elise had remembered her, not as the sister she had tried so hard to save. No, this was something different. This was the reflection of what Marla had become, the thing Elise had fought against, the last echo of the curse. Marla's eyes, once full of warmth, were now hollow black voids, her face gaunt and pale, as though the very essence of her had been drained. She was not alive. She was not the sister Elise had loved. She was a vessel, a remnant of the darkness that had infected Ashwick, and now she was standing before Elise, beckoning her forward. "Elise," Marla whispered, her voice distant, hollow, but still achingly familiar. "You have chosen. You have broken the curse. But you cannot run from your past. You cannot run from what you are." Elise felt a pang of sorrow deep within her. She wanted to reach out, to hold Marla, to fix what had been broken. But she knew the truth now. This was not her sister. This was a manifestation of the curse. And the time had come to decide once, and for all, what she would do with it. Her heart beat faster as the weight of the decision settled upon her. The key in her hand still pulsed, its light flickering like a fragile star in the darkness. Elise had to choose. She had to make the final choice. Would she continue to carry the burden of Ashwick, of the curse that had haunted her for so long? Or would she break free, no matter the cost? The entity's voice echoed once again, cold and unyielding. "Choose, Elise. Choose what you will. Become." And with those words, the world around her seemed to freeze. The final moment had arrived. The air around Elise grew thick, almost suffocating, as the weight of the decision crushed down upon her. Her hands shook, still gripping the key, its faint light pulsating in time with her heart. The shadows stretched before her, twisting and flickering like a living thing, feeding off her uncertainty. Marla, the reflection of Marla, the shadow of the curse, stood just beyond her reach, her hollow eyes locked onto Elise's, a silent plea in her gaze. But Elise knew, deep in her soul, that this wasn't her sister. This was something else. Something that had been warped, twisted by the very thing she had fought to destroy. Ashwick's curse, its shadows, had fed on Marla's grief, her pain, and now it was offering her something. Offering her a choice that felt both impossible and inevitable. She took a step forward, the ground beneath her feet solid, but every step felt like it carried the weight of 1,000 memories. The haunting, whispers of the past, the echoes of Ashwick, the faces of those who had been lost. Each one of them had been touched by the curse. Each one had paid the price. And now, it was her turn to decide. Elise. The voice, soft and distant, came. Again a plea from the very heart of Ashwick. You cannot break free. You can never escape what you are. You were chosen to carry this burden. No, Elise whispered, her voice shaky but resolute. I was not chosen. I chose. I chose to end this. I chose to fight. Her chest tightened with a surge of strength. She had fought through the worst of it. The darkness, the grief, the horror. She had faced the depths of the curse and had torn through it with nothing but her will and the key. But the key, she realized, wasn't just a tool to destroy. It was a part of her, a part of the curse she had been carrying with her all along. It was the symbol of everything she had done, everything she had become. The key burned hot in her hand, and for the first time, Elise realized what she had to do. She had to release it. She had to destroy not just the curse, but the last tether that bound her to it. The key had been a crutch, a connection to the past, to the town, to the memories that had been haunting her. But it was no longer the solution. It had to be let go. The reflection of Marla, her eyes hollow, her smile faint but knowing, shifted as Elise stepped forward. The shadows in the distance seemed to reach for her, pulling at her body, at her very essence. But Elise stood firm. She would not let herself be consumed again. She would not become a part of the darkness. I choose, Elise said again, her voice growing stronger. I choose to break the cycle. I choose to be free. The figure of Marla flickered, and in that flicker, Elise saw something, a glimpse of the past, of the warmth and love she had once shared with her sister. A flicker of who Marla had been before Ashwick had taken her, before the curse had twisted everything. In that moment, the key in her hand pulsed one last time, its light blinding, filling the world around her. The shadows recoiled. The void began to ripple, and Elise felt the pull of the curse release from her. It was not a battle to fight. It was a letting go. A letting go of all the pain, all the loss, all the brokenness she had carried with her. The key exploded in light, sending a shockwave through the void. The ground beneath her feet began to crack apart as the very fabric of the cursed world began to unravel. The darkness screamed, but it was futile. It could not hold her any longer. And then the world shifted. The void, the shadows, the figures, they all dissolved. The light, though blinding at first, softened, like the first rays of dawn creeping over the horizon. The ground beneath Elise's feet became solid, stable, and real again. She took a deep breath, her lungs filling with air that was fresh, clear, free of the weight of the curse. For the first time in what felt like forever, Elise was at peace. She looked around, and the landscape before her had changed. Gone was the twisted path, the bleak, endless horizon. Instead, she was standing on a grassy hill, the sun rising gently over the land, casting a warm, golden glow across the world. There were trees, tall, full of life, and flowers, their colors vibrant in the early light. It was a world reborn. Not a perfect world, but a real one. A place where she could finally breathe without the weight of the past pressing down on her. For the first time, Elise could see a future that wasn't defined by the shadows of Ashwick. A future that was hers to shape, hers to live. Behind her, she heard a soft sound, the sound of footsteps. She turned, heart in her throat, but when she saw who it was, her breath caught. It was Marla, but not the Marla of the curse. Not the hollow, tortured reflection. This was her sister. The one she had lost, the one she had fought for. Marla smiled, her eyes soft, her face full of warmth. You did it, Elise, she said, her voice gentle and full of love. You freed us. Tears welled in Elise's eyes as she rushed forward, collapsing into her sister's arms. For the first time in so long, she felt a sense of peace. It wasn't a perfect ending. It wasn't the world she had once known, but it was real. And it was hers. Her sister was with her again, not as a ghost, not as a reflection, but as someone she could finally hold, someone who could walk beside her. "I've missed you," Elise whispered, her voice shaking. Marla hugged her tightly. "I know, but we're together again, Elise. And now we have a chance. A chance." The word echoed through Elise's mind, and in that moment, she understood. The curse wasn't just a thing that haunted Ashwick. It was a thing that had haunted her. But now it was over. She had chosen to let go. She had chosen to live. And with that, the world around them seemed to shift again. But this time it wasn't a void, a descent into darkness. It was a world full of possibility, a world full of life, a world where Elise could finally find peace. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was living.